Hello and welcome to the definitive guide to setting up a home recording studio and getting your music published on Spotify, Apple Music and much more. I'm Nigel Cooper, and throughout this video tutorial I'm going to be covering absolutely everything from the equipment you'll need, both hardware and software, how to set it all up and configure it, and how to use it and get the very best out of it. I've also composed an edgy pop song, and I'll be showing you how I laid down all the tracks myself by programming in the drum part, playing in the bass guitar, the electric guitar, keyboards and even singing the vocals, as well as doing the mixing, mastering and final output of a commercial release ready song ready for distribution. At the end of the video I'll also show you how to get your music published onto all the mainstream digital music streaming services such as Spotify and Apple Music. And I'll be telling you which digital music distribution companies to use and which to avoid. I just want to say that I've put this video tutorial together out of love and not for monetary gain, so I'm not going to be recommending gear or plugging any given manufacturer for kickbacks because there simply are none. And you won't find a whole load of affiliate links in the description below either, as I'm not interested in making a few crumbs here and there. I'm just interested in putting out the most definitive and comprehensive video tutorial guide to setting up a home recording studio and walking you through the entire process from the gear you'll need to getting your first single published on Spotify and iTunes and absolutely everything in between. This is going to be rather a long video as there's a lot to cover, so go and make yourself a sandwich, grab a drink and get comfy in front of your TV and stream it there. It will be a more pleasurable viewing and learning experience. Having said that, there are timestamps in the description below so you can dip in and out at your leisure, but this video tutorial is chronological, so I would recommend watching the entire thing in order. In the description below you'll find links that go directly through to the manufacturer's websites, not to Amazon, so you can read up on any technical specifications that I don't go into here. You'll also find links to free books that I'll be talking about and recommending, as well as some really cool other resources too. So strap yourself in, because by the time you get to the end of this video presentation, checked out the resources and books, you're going to feel like you've completed a degree in music technology and home recording studio techniques. Now don't worry if you don't play the guitar, bass or keyboard, as I'll be showing you some alternative ways to get these instruments laid down onto the individual tracks on your computer. Then at the end I'll be showing you how to get your music published on Spotify, Apple Music, iTunes, Amazon Music, Tidal, Deezer and more. So you can say, "Hey Siri, play my band," or "Alexa, play my band," and just like well-known bands such as The Weeknd, Tame Impala, Avenged Sevenfold or Nine Inch Nails, your music will be accessible via these platforms too. Also, people will be able to Shazam your music if they ever hear it in a public place. When I get to the part about digital music distribution companies, I'm going to be going into details about the ones that I use and the ones to avoid. You might have even heard of some of them: Distrokid, CD Baby, AWOL, RootNote, TuneCore, Symphonic Distribution, to name a few. Well, I've researched the top 15 and I'll be going through some of the pros and cons of all of them, and also be telling you my top 2 preferred distribution companies and why. When it comes to the equipment that I'll be using and recommending, what I won't be doing is plugging a load of equipment because of affiliate kickbacks, because there are none. The gear that you'll see me using and demonstrating throughout this video is gear that I've spent several months fastidiously researching, and I'll be recommending it because it's the best that you can buy at this price point, and it's capable of producing commercial quality release ready singles and albums. But the equipment that I'll be using during this video also has many advantages over most of the other brand equivalents, which I'll also cover in more detail in the equipment sections. I spent considerable time researching and putting this video together for the love of it, because like you, I love home music production and composing rock, pop, R&B and dance music. Basically, I've taken all the hard work out of choosing the best equipment for your home recording studio, but without breaking the bank. And I've also spent the past 6 months or so reading up on, researching, trying out and testing most of the modern audio interfaces, near-field monitors, Midi keyboard controllers and microphones, so you don't have to. When it comes to home recording studio equipment, it's an absolute minefield out there with so much gear to choose from, as manufacturers dazzle you with their technical specs to try and entice you to buy their gear. The equipment that I'll be recommending throughout this video is bang up to date and state of the art. It's what I personally use for my own recordings, but I'll go into more detail on that shortly. The total cost of everything you'll need for a home recording studio, if you follow my advice and recommendations here, comes in at between £2,500 and £3,000, or $3,500 to $4,000 if you're in the USA. However, this price excludes the computer and software. Now this might sound like a lot to some people, to others it might sound low, and in the grand scheme of recording studio equipment, it is low. However, the equipment that I'm going to be covering, talking about and using during this video is capable of producing commercial release-ready recordings that won't sound out of place being played in between a song by The Weeknd and another by Coldplay on BBC Radio 1. Take the audio interface for example. There are many excellent audio interfaces available for under £1,000. In fact, there are some superb ones for under £500. During the past 6 months, I've done a ton of research on about 25 different makes and models. I've read loads of reviews on them, watched YouTube videos on them, had manufacturers send them to me for a short loan spell, and even bought them and returned them. Anybody who knows me will tell you that I'm incredibly fastidious and fussy when it comes to equipment, so I check for build quality to start with, and here I want an all-metal case with a tough construction. I want the buttons and dials to feel sturdy and rugged and to have a nice tactile feel to them. I want the XLR and jack sockets to be tough and built to withstand having cables plugged in and yanked out many times over many years. And when I plug an XLR mic cable or headphone cable into one of the sockets, I don't want to be able to wiggle the socket side to side with any degree of movement, as this would suggest questionable build quality that could lead to solder coming apart inside the device, a circuit board breaking or something else. As well as having to pass my fastidious build quality evaluation, it also has to have all the right specifications, such as being able to record at 48 and 96 kHz at 24-bit for commercial release, for example. It also has to have the right amount of inputs and outputs, high quality analog to digital converters, silent preamps, and a decent level of gain to drive even the most demanding of microphones such as the Shure SM7B or electro-voice RE20 for example, and this is just the tip of the iceberg. When it comes to choosing a MIDI keyboard controller, they're an absolute nightmare. For a start, most of them seem to be built like cheap plastic toys that you could easily break over your knee, while others just don't integrate that well with your DAW. Oh, and whenever I say DAW, I'm not referring to that thing that the postman shoves letters for in the morning. I'm talking about the Digital Audio Workstation, or DAW, which is basically the software on your computer where you record all the music to, carry out the mixing and mastering. I'll be covering that in a moment, but back to the MIDI keyboards. I've had several sent to me from various manufacturers, bought a load online and tried several in local music shops. The ones I evaluated were from companies including Roland, Korg, Native Instruments, M-Audio, Nectar, Yamaha and MKII, to name a few. And I can tell you that when it comes to build quality, most of them are built like children's toys with no metal in sight, and the keyboard actions are questionable at best. I have no idea why, but most MIDI keyboard manufacturers just don't seem to build their keyboards to the same standards as, say, a 1980s synthesizer, such as an old Yamaha DX27 for example. Because MIDI keyboards are not going to be gigged, well actually some are, some manufacturers actually build them cheaply, knowing that it's just going to sit on the desk in front of your computer. So they're often built to the same cheap plastic standards as a budget inkjet printer for example. Add to this the headache one often has trying to get the keyboard to talk to the DAW seamlessly. Well, you can see how choosing a MIDI keyboard controller alone can be a logistical nightmare. But fear not, after a lot of researching and trying most of them, I did find one very bright shining star, and I'm going to be using and demonstrating it and highly recommending it in this video. I'll be using it quite a lot throughout this video, as there are some amazing and unique features and qualities that this MIDI keyboard controller has, and one particular feature that you won't find on any other MIDI keyboard. Before I get into the equipment side of things, I just want to point out that there are too many people that get too wrapped up on what famous artists and musicians are using and what every vlogger is using or talking about. This drives me nuts. We all know that the vocals on Michael Jackson's album Thriller was recorded using a Shure SM7 microphone, and that there are loads of YouTubers who swear by them and recommend them. Most people probably recommend it simply because Michael Jackson used one all those years ago, but this doesn't mean it's suitable for your voice. In fact, it probably isn't, and it takes a hell of a lot of gain from your audio interface to drive it, as it's one seriously gain-hungry microphone due to it being a dynamic mic with no phantom power. Again, more on this a little later, but when it comes to microphones, you have to choose one according to your own vocal characteristics and timbre, and not because Michael Jackson, Trent Reznor, Kelly Jones, The Weeknd, Rihanna, Christina Aguilera, or whoever else uses one. If you've got a smooth, rounded, soft tenor voice, you'd do well to go for a mic that has a bit of grit and bite to it, or if you've got a gritty voice, you'd probably suit a more rounded, smoother mic with a darker character. I'll be recommending two mics a little later on that should cover most vocal types nicely. Okay, so let's take a look at the various pieces of equipment that I'm going to be using throughout this video so I can explain a bit more about the individual items that are required for a small home recording studio such as this one right here. I'll cover the mates and the models that I use and why I think that you should use them too. At the beginning of this video I mentioned that all the hardware comes in at between £2,500 and £3,000, but this is excluding the computer and the software. When it comes to the computer, it doesn't matter whether you use a Mac or a PC, and I'm certainly not going to get into the whole Mac versus PC debate here. Either will do the job just fine. There are a few pros and cons to both. Admittedly, there are probably more pros in my opinion to using a Mac. So if you don't yet have a powerful enough or suitable computer for audio work and you have to buy one, then I'd suggest a Mac, but more on this shortly. So just before I dive into the equipment side of things, I will just say that I've spent several months researching all this equipment fastidiously, and I've cherry-picked the very best equipment at a price that won't break the bank. I've just taken all the hard work out of it for you. I've done all the research and testing so you don't have to. Let me give you a quick example. One of the microphones that I use for my own work and during this video is a Sennheiser MK4, which costs around £275 new. The reason this mic is such a good one is because it was designed around the industry standard Neumann U87, which cost around £2,000. The MK4 shares a lot of the same technology and design as the U87, so it's going to give you some of that amazing Neumann sound, a slightly dark character with a nice rounded bass and crisp high frequencies. Although the Sennheiser MK4 costs just £275, it's by far one of the best phantom-powered, large diaphragm studio condenser vocal microphones that you can buy at any price. And unlike the Shure SM7B, it doesn't require a ton of gain or a cloud lifter to get anything out of it, as it's phantom-powered. Okay, moving on to the equipment, you're going to need a computer with some editing software installed. This software is called the DAW, or Digital Audio Workstation, and it's where you'll assemble and build your songs. You'll also need a hardware audio interface to plug instruments in, such as guitars, basses, and microphones. This will enable you to get those sounds into the computer's DAW to start with. You'll need a good set of monitors for monitoring, mixing, and mastering your tracks, and remember, decent monitors are critical when it comes to mixing and mastering. You'll need an accurate pair of closed-back headphones, a Midi keyboard controller, a microphone with a stand and pop filter, and some room treatment material. So what I'm going to do now is quickly walk you through each individual piece of equipment that I'll be using, and I'll explain why I picked these particular mates and models over the abundance of alternatives. Okay, so let's kick off with the computer and DAW. An Apple Mac or a Windows PC will both get the job done just fine. However, based on about 35 years experience using everything from a ZX Spectrum, Atari ST, BBC computers, several versions of Windows and various configurations of PCs, and every iMac computer since the first G3 23 years ago, I'd have to say that Apple computers are just more intuitive and a lot nicer to use when compared to the Windows machines, and they hardly ever crash or give you trouble, and viruses are extremely rare compared to the viruses Windows users have to deal with. Okay, there's another important reason that you should lean towards an Apple Mac system if you're in the market for either upgrading, buying a new computer, or if you've been living in a cave for the past 30 years and don't have a computer at all. Apart from the reasons I've outlined already, another very good reason is the software and the money that Apple has to put into it. For me, Logic is by far one of the best, if not the best, DAWs you can buy. It's solid, stable, logical and, in the grand scheme of things, easy to get your head around. It costs £199 or $199 if you're in the USA, but if you don't want to spend that amount, Apple's GarageBand is free and it's laid out and works in a similar way to Logic Pro, so it will be an easy and logical transition up to Logic Pro later on. For the computer, I'd recommend one of the new M1 iMac computers as they're blisteringly fast, and unlike the Intel machines, the chips don't heat up, so you don't get fans kicking in while bouncing tracks down. Also, if you get Logic Pro, the chances are you won't feel the need to spend any more money on effects plugins, as it comes with hundreds of them and the quality of them are studio grade, and this is because Apple have money behind them to put into this. Apple can afford to plough loads of money into the development of any given plugin for Logic Pro, which is why they're so good. I can personally recall the history of one such Apple Reverb plugin called Space Designer. Apple didn't always own this plugin. It was developed and put together by another company over many years, and it cost a pretty packet back then. In 2002, eMagic was selling this plugin for £500 alone, and that was 20 years ago when £500 was a lot of money. When Apple first acquired the eMagic Space Designer plugin, even they were selling it for the same price, but eventually Apple would bundle it free with Logic Pro, which today costs less than half the price of this plugin alone. Okay, I know I'm starting to sound like an Apple and Logic fanboy right now, but there's a reason that majority of top recording studios around the world have Logic Pro installed on their systems. If you already have a Windows machine, on the other hand, I would look at the following DAW software packages: Ableton Live, ImageLine FL Studio, Reaper 6, Reason Studios and PreSonus Studio. I'm sure you can download a 30-day demo of most of these DAWs to try them out and see which you prefer the look of and the feel of, but they all basically do the same thing. Here, in my home recording studio that I'm demonstrating today, I'm using a 27-inch Intel-based iMac from 2017, which makes it 4 years old. So it's not the most up-to-date computer, but with a 4.2 GHz quad-core i7 processor, an 8GB graphics card, 40 gigs of RAM and a 1TB SSD hard drive, it's more than enough to run Logic Pro with multiple tracks and effects plugins. Okay, next comes the audio interface. Mine is actually hidden just behind the keyboard here, and this could be considered the heart of the system. The audio interface is the device that allows you to get real instruments onto a track in the DAW on the computer. The audio interface converts the analog signals from, say, an electric guitar or a bass guitar or microphone into a digital audio file that ends up on one of the tracks in the DAW, in this case Logic Pro. There are many things to consider when choosing an audio interface, such as how many inputs you might need, the quality of the analog to digital converters, the quality of the preamps and their noise floor, how much microphone gain it has, the build quality, the display and the accuracy of the record level meters, how many headphone sockets you might need, and so on and so forth. Most home recording studios won't be recording an entire band and drummer all at the same time, so the need for endless inputs usually won't be required. Fact is, most home recording studios only ever record one instrument or one vocalist at a time, so just one input will usually suffice, but having a couple more can come in handy sometimes. Likewise for the headphone sockets, many audio interfaces only have one headphone socket, unless you start to go up in price, of course. Again, most people will typically only ever need one single headphone socket, but there are times when you might need two or more. For example, if you have a singer come to your studio to lay down a vocal track, they will need a pair of headphones for the backing track, while you'll also need to listen in on another pair, hence two sockets. During the past 6 months or so, I've tried several audio interfaces ranging from £200 up to around £2,000. Some I loaned for a few days, others I bought and then returned after a few days also. I also read loads of reviews on many different makes and models and watched hours upon hours of reviews and tutorials on YouTube too. Based on all this reading, watching, researching and hands-on experience for testing and evaluation purposes, I narrowed it down to just 3, and then after careful consideration, I narrowed it down to just 2, both coincidentally by the same company. These are the Antelope Audio Discrete 4 Synergy Core, which I've got right here, which comes in at around £879 on average, depending where you shop, and the other is the Antelope Audio model called the Zen Go, which cost around £450. I personally went with the discrete 4 Synergy, but I can highly recommend them both, and I'll go into more detail on them shortly. Yes, I'll agree, there are cheaper audio interfaces out there, many very good ones, but there are some not so good ones too. I found that certain manufacturers' claims on their spec sheets didn't always bear out in the real-world testing. Noise floor and gain output are just a few examples. After buying a Focusrite Claret 4 Pre, for example, I ended up moving it on as I found that it didn't quite have enough headroom with its mic gain output to drive an electro-voice RE20 dynamic microphone as effectively as I would have liked. And I also know a few people who've had some reliability issues with some of Focusrite's more budget audio interfaces. This isn't any way a Focusrite bash, as they make some excellent audio interfaces, but the sonic quality that I've managed to squeeze out of them over the years didn't quite match up to, say, a Universal Audio or an Antelope Audio model. And for me, it's all about the audio quality first and foremost, and then the quality of the AD converters, the preamps, the gain level, and the accuracy of the meters, and so on and so forth. How many inputs and outputs, the build quality. Anyway, the mic pre's on the Antelope Audio are discrete class A, and not many audio interfaces in this price range have mic pre's like this. Same for the AD converters, they're top notch, and at the end of the day, Antelope Audio are well known for their top sound quality and performance. Oh, and as a bonus, they use real-time FX, so you can build up plugins without taxing your computer's CPU. Also, with other audio interfaces, each plugin would add more latency, but the Antelope doesn't work like that. Instead, it treats all plugins as one where latency is concerned, so low latency performance is amazing. There's also another consideration. Given that pretty much all audio interfaces are software driven these days, and many have their own plugin options, you have to look at that too. How easy is it to configure the audio interface in software? Are the bundled plugins just a gimmick, or are they high quality and usable? And most importantly, will they improve the quality, add or take away from any given song that you're working on? This was one of the deciding factors that turned me onto Antelope Audio. The software is so easy to use and configure, and Antelope Audio also makes some of the very best plugins that you can buy. For example, their guitar emulations are just incredible. Antelope plugins, in my opinion, sound just as good, if not better, than the UAD ones, and I've owned a Universal Audio Apollo 8 with loads of UAD plugins. For me, I can't see the point in spending all that extra money on UAD hardware and plugins when Antelope Audio do the same thing, often better, and for much less money. At the end of the day, you're not going to get the true hardware sound from any FX plugin, no matter who makes it. So debating over minuscule differences is pointless, and that time would be better spent creating music and just getting on with recording. But rest assured, the Antelope FX plugins are super high quality, pure sounding, crystal clear, and incredibly accurate when compared to the hardware outboard equivalents. And I find that they just stack up better in the mix, and their analog emulations, EQs and compressors are some of the very best in the world today. If you can't afford or don't want to spend £875 for the discrete 4 that I've got here, then have a look at the Zen Go model instead, which comes in at around half the price, at about £450. There is no audible quality difference between these two, and if I'm honest, the only reason I went with the discrete 4 was because I prefer all the controls, the display and sockets to be on the front with other sockets on the back, so I can place it directly underneath my computer. In comparison, the Zen Go has the main dial and buttons and display on the top, so it has to be on your desktop where you can see and get to the dials and buttons. But if this isn't an issue for you, then go for the Zen Go, because it's by far one of the best audio interfaces at any price. Next, you're going to need a good quality microphone. During this part of the video, I'm actually going to be covering two different makes and models of microphones because they both have slightly different characteristics and tonal qualities to suit different voice types. Also, they're both different microphone types. One's a condenser mic and the other's dynamic. These days, if you've got £200 to spend on a microphone, you're in luck because you'll have a large choice of some excellent quality microphones. Gone are the days when you had to spend £2,000 on a Neumann U87. Now don't get me wrong, the U87 is still one of the best mics in the world and it's still one of my favourite microphones today. But there are other microphones that are used in top recording studios around the world that would cost way less and do the same job. albeit with a slightly different tonal characteristic. At the end of the day, most of today's quality mics are all as good as each other, they just have slightly different tonal characters, and with the use of plugins in your DAW, it's quite easy to get one mic to sound like another anyway, and I've yet to hear a commercially released track, at least any track released during the last half century, that didn't have some sort of EQ, reverb, compression, or some other effect applied to it. And as soon as effects get applied to a vocal track, a lot of the microphone tonal characteristics are changed anyway. They're often disguised or masked. Honestly, I don't think there's a recording engineer on the planet who could successfully take the Pepsi Challenge test and distinguish between, say, a Shure SM7B and a Rode NT1 by the time they've been mixed, EQ'd, and had a degree of reverb, delay, compression, and been pushed through the amp simulator. What's more important is to choose a mic that will suit your voice and singing style, or whoever's going to be singing on your tracks. So with this in mind, again, after a ton of research and trying out and testing various makes and models of mics, and I've owned loads, including the Neumann U87 AI, I've cherry-picked the following two microphones, the electro-voice RE20 and the Sennheiser MK4. The electro-voice RE20 cost around £475, while the Sennheiser MK4 comes in at around £250, depending on where you shop. Now these two mics are quite different for different reasons, which I'll cover now, but both are stunning vocal mics and both work perfectly with the Antelope Discreet 4 and Zen Go, as both these audio interfaces have a massive 65 dB of microphone gain. Okay, I figured I'd talk about these two microphones while actually speaking into them so you can hear the difference in tonal qualities between the two. So I'll start by talking about this Sennheiser MK4 right here while actually speaking into it, and then in a couple of minutes I'll swap it out for the electro-voice RE20. I've got the microphone at a slight angle, about a 45-degree angle to the corner of my mouth, so I'm speaking slightly across it. This is a technique I generally use even when I'm using a pop shield, because when you speak slightly across the mic with it aiming towards the corner of your mouth, it just helps reject plosives. So starting with the Sennheiser MK4 here, the reason I picked this one as one of my two choices is simple. It's sonic and tonal qualities. Sennheiser are part of the Neumann group, and between them I don't think there's another company on the planet that knows as much about microphone technology. The MK4 is designed around the much more expensive Neumann U87, and it shares some of the same of the U87's tonal qualities too. If you get in close while singing, you'll notice some of that lovely dark Neumann U87 colour with crystal clear midtones and a slightly bright but pleasant top end. I've tried loads of other mics costing 4 times the price that didn't impress me anywhere near as much as this Sennheiser MK4 did. The MK4 has an all-metal construction with a metal grille, and it has a good amount of weight to it. Basically, it's built to the same studio-grade standards as the Neumann U87. It's a bare-bones microphone, so there's no switches or buttons, just a single XLR socket on the bottom. It has a cardioid polar pattern which picks up sound from the front while rejecting sounds from the back and sides, which is exactly what you want for doing vocal work. There isn't much about the MK4 that I don't like. Background noise rejection is pretty good, and I just love the subtle coloration. For singing, the MK4 has a slightly airy and open sound which will add a slightly different dimension and character to your vocals. There's hardly any sibilance at all, none if you use a pop filter like I am here, which you should do, and the proximity effect is to die for. When you get in nice and close, you get what only Neumann and Sennheiser can do, that lovely silky smooth proximity effect, controlled low frequencies, crystal clear mids, and plenty of bite in the high frequencies. This all adds up to transparent and super clear vocal recordings, be it sung or spoken. The MK4 is a large capsule phantom-powered condenser studio microphone, and it's very easy to drive. With the Antelope Discreet 4 or Zen Go, you simply turn the phantom power on via the Antelope launcher software, and I found that for close vocals I only needed to dial in about 26 dB of gain, or with my mouth a little further away like I am here, approximately 7 or 8 inches, I dialed in 36 dB of gain. Overall, it's a superb microphone that will suit a wide range of voices, but it's especially good if you have a soft, rounded voice and you want to add a bit of edge and sparkle to it. The MK4 would be an ideal mic for vocalists such as Michael Jackson, Billie Eilish, Celine Dion, Sam Cooke, Michael Bublé and Ellie Goulding, for example, as these singers all have nice, smooth, soft, rounded vocal tones, so the MK4 will help spice them up a little and give them a bit more sparkle. If you go for the MK4, I'd strongly recommend spending an extra £95 on the Sennheiser MK-S4 shock mount, as this will totally eliminate any vibrations travelling up the mic stand to the microphone. Okay, so I've swapped the Sennheiser out and now I've got the electro-voice RE20 set up here. The RE20 is a different type of microphone, whereas the Sennheiser MK4 is a condenser mic. The RE20 is a dynamic mic, so it's not phantom powered and is therefore harder to drive and requires more gain from the audio interface. Again, the Antelope Discreet 4 and Zengo both have 65 dB of gain, so either of them will drive this RE20 with headroom to spare. I find for close vocal work, where I'm right on top of the mic, the RE20 required about 55 dB of gain, and at about 8 inches away it required about 60 dB of gain. But do make sure that the phantom power is turned off in the software for the audio interface, or it could potentially damage the mic as it's not phantom powered and it does not require this extra voltage. Unlike the Sennheiser MK4, which is a side address mic, the RE20 is an end address mic, meaning you sing into the end of it. The RE20 is built like a tank with an all-metal construction and a metal grille. There are 8 slats with a metal grille going down the side of the mic, which is a unique design to the RE20, and it decreases the amount of proximity effect that you get with it. The only switch on the RE20 is a high-pass or low-pass cut filter, and that's it. So like the Sennheiser, a pretty basic design. Like the MK4, the RE20 also has a cardioid polar pattern, which is what's required for vocalists. The RE20 is a classic, and for good reason. It sounds amazing with vocals, and it does a super job with background rejection noise. Admittedly, the RE20 is double the price of the Sennheiser, but it's a different sort of microphone that produces a different sort of sound. The RE20 mic is more suitable for harsher voices that have some grit and bite to them, as it will help to round them off a little. This microphone would suit singers such as Rod Stewart, Kelly Jones, Kurt Cobain, Adele, John Bon Jovi, Joe Cocker, Bonnie Tyler, Tom Waits, Janis Joplin, or anybody else with a similar gruff, raspy singing voice that has some edge to it. With voice types like these, the RE20 will help tone them down a little for a more pleasing presentation. If you have a soft, smooth voice, you don't want to be using a mic that has a smooth, rounded tonal quality, or you'll just end up with an ultra soft and overly smooth vocal track that won't cut through the mix that well. Likewise, if you have a voice like Kelly Jones of the Stereophonics, you won't want to be using a microphone that has a large amount of grit and bite to it, or you'd end up with an overly gritty and edgy sound that you'd have to smooth out with EQ in post. The electro-voice RE20 has been around for about 50 years, and it's considered an industry standard in both recording studios and in radio broadcast. It's got by far the best proximity effect of any microphone ever made. Proximity effect, if you don't know, is that exaggerated low-frequency bass sound that you get when you put your mouth right close up to the mic, which results in a horrible booming sound. The RE20 has a unique design, so no matter how close you get to it when you're singing, there's virtually no proximity effect at all, which is why radio DJs and broadcasters prefer it, and why studio sound engineers around the world love it. So there it is, my recommendations for 2 different types of microphone, and they're the 2 microphones that I use all the time. If you want a phantom powered condenser mic, I can't recommend the Sennheiser MK4 enough. If you want a dynamic mic, then the electro-voice RE20 should be at the top of your list. To go with the mic, you'll also need a pop filter. Without one, you'll probably get plosives and excessive sibilance. Plosives are those deep popping sounds that you get when singing words beginning with P and B, as bursts of air hit the microphone's diaphragm, resulting in a horrible distorted sound. Pop filters have been designed to prevent these bursts of air from hitting the mic's diaphragm, but there's a little bit more to it than that. Most people just head on over to Amazon to buy one of those pop filters that has either a single or worse, a double layer of nylon stretched over a circular plastic frame that's mounted on a bendy gooseneck arm with a clamp on the end. Now these types of filters are better than nothing at all, but it's the fact that the nylon material can have a tiny impact on the audio as it can affect the high frequencies. It's kind of like hitting the Dolby B button on an old-fashioned tape deck. Given that vocals have mostly mid and high frequencies, you don't want to risk filtering any of them out with a nylon pop filter. It still amazes me how many people use these nylon pop filters, even top recording studios, when there's a better option. And no, I'm not talking about strapping a pencil to the front of your mic with an elastic band either. As for the record, it doesn't work, so don't even go there. I'm talking about the Stedman ProScreen PS101. The PS101 comes in at around £50, more than your nasty nylon thing admittedly, but it's way better built, has zero effect on the audio quality, and it will last for an age. The PS101 is a really clever metal mesh design that's been stamped in such a way that when air hits it from the singer's side, it is forced downwards when it comes out the other side, so no burst of air will hit the microphone's diaphragm at all, while allowing all the vocal sounds through, even the highest of frequencies. With the nylon types, not only can they affect the high frequencies in the voice, but bursts of air can still hit the microphone's diaphragm anyway, admittedly much reduced, but they still get through. Because the PS101 is a metal mesh design, it's also easy to keep clean, which is important, especially if you're doing a recording with a singer like Johnny Rotten, who's probably just going to end up gobbing all over it during the session, so there's a hygiene advantage too. Finally, the pop filter will protect your microphone's diaphragm, which are quite delicate. The mic's diaphragm vibrates microscopically as it senses air pressure movement from your voice, and these diaphragms are very sensitive, especially to spittle, which will inevitably come flying out of the singer's mouth during a session, especially with some punk and metal singers who often sing and scream like they're trying to start a bar fight. The fact is, spittle and delicate microphone diaphragms don't mix. Condensation is another enemy of the diaphragm. The PS101 will prevent spittle getting onto the mesh and into the diaphragm of your mic, so not only will it prevent pops and excessive sibilance, it will also protect your mic's diaphragm too. This might sound obvious, but on from the pop filter, a microphone cover is just as important, as the diaphragm is not only sensitive to spittle and moisture, it's also sensitive to dust and UV rays. So I'd recommend buying a decent mic cover to pop over your microphone when it's not in use. I found a really cool one made by a company called Velis X that not only protects the mic from dust, but also from UV rays if it happens to be left in direct sunlight at any point during the day. And this will also help to retain the colour of the metalwork on the mic for years to come. The Velis X M Studio C cover costs just €13, so there's absolutely no excuse not to get one. Next, we have what is arguably the most important piece of equipment in the studio, the monitors, or more importantly, near-field monitors like these ones I've got here. These monitors are designed to be used at close range, typically within a few meters. If you don't know anything about near-field monitors or how they differ from regular hi-fi speakers, the latter are tuned and coloured to some degree as domestic hi-fi speaker manufacturers aim to bring their own unique flavour to the party, which is fine in the world of hi-fi, even high-end hi-fi, but for studio monitors, sound engineering and mixing purposes, domestic hi-fi speakers just won't do at all. Instead, the studio monitor has been designed in such a way that it does not colour the sound in any way. Instead, they're designed to reproduce the music naturally and accurately. Well, at least in practice they're supposed to, but there are even some studio monitors on the market that have a certain flavour, which is not good, as when you're mixing your song, what's required is an accurate representation of everything you're doing in the mix, be it getting the levels right, adjusting the EQ, or adding various effects such as reverb, delay, or compression, for example. So what you don't want is a pair of studio monitors that are coloured in any way. For example, if you buy a pair of studio monitors that are unnaturally bass heavy, you'd compensate for this during the mixing stage by bringing the bass down using EQ. Now this would sound fine on the monitors via your DAW and audio interface, but as soon as you bounce that track down, export it, and play it back in a car, on your friend's hi-fi system, or your Sonos in the bedroom, or anywhere else, you'll notice a distinct lack of bass. This would be because the bass-heavy monitors tricked you into adjusting your mix to compensate, resulting in a bass-light final master. KRK rockets are known for this. You've probably seen them on YouTube with their distinctive yellow bass drivers. I've had a few pairs of KRK rockets in various sizes over the years, and to my ears, they always seem to be too heavy on bass and not that natural at all, more suited to, say, club DJs than studio recording engineers. I know they're popular and you see them in pretty much every bedroom studio on the planet, but that doesn't mean they're ideal for mixing. Back in the early 80s, every man and his dog were buying Amstrad stereo systems, but that didn't mean they were any good either. Fact is, those old Amstrad stereo systems were absolute garbage. Those who knew the difference bought decent hi-fi from companies such as Lin, Name, Nakamichi, Riga, Meridian and Krell, to name a few, but definitely not Amstrad. Now, I'm not putting KRK rockets in the same ballpark as Amstrad music systems, but there are better tools for the job, especially given how important monitors are, and these are your listening devices. These are what you'll be doing your editing, mixing and mastering on, and they'll be giving you your audible feedback each and every time you adjust a knob or dial something in or move a slider, anything like that, just adjusting levels of the backing vocals, for example. So your monitors have to be good. In fact, they have to be better than good, or your mix won't be accurate, period. I've owned, tried, researched, loaned, bought and returned quite a lot of sets of near-field monitors over the years, and especially during the past 6 months in preparation for this video. I discounted the KRK Rocket range for reasons already explained, and although in the past I've used and owned the Adam A7X monitors and they are superb, in hindsight I did find the treble to be a little on the high side during extended sessions. Yamaha HS8s are very nice for the price, but the bass is a bit warm and the mids are a little muddy, while the treble is also a little bit too smooth. I won't go through them all, but I found various issues with several sets of monitors ranging from $300 up to about £1,000. In the end, I settled on a pair of Kali Audio IN8 monitors, which is what I've got right here. Now, I'd never heard of Kali until recently when a friend of mine who owns a recording studio recommended them. During a phone conversation, he said that he'd heard them at a show and was really impressed. And this is coming from a guy who uses £40,000 ATC SCM 300A monitors. The Kali IN8s come in at around £650 for a pair. Now, anybody that knows anything about studio monitors will be thinking that's cheap, and they are. To others, it might sound expensive, but trust me on this, for the sound quality and accuracy that they reproduce for monitoring purposes, they're an absolute bargain, and here's why. Firstly, any professional recording engineer will tell you that a three-way monitor design with 3 separate speakers in each cabinet is the way to go: a bass driver, a mid-range and a tweeter. And I agree with this for various reasons, the main one being audible clarity in the mid-range. If you only have a 2-way design with just a bass driver and a tweeter, the bass driver is trying to do 2 jobs at once. It's trying to reproduce accurate bass while also trying to put across mid-range with clarity. This is scientifically impossible. Well, at least if you want total and utter accuracy between the bass, mid-range and treble. So with 2-way designs, there's typically some sort of audible compromise. Now, you're probably looking at these Kali monitors and thinking, hang on a minute, they look like a 2-way design to me, but they're not. They're actually a 3-way design. The tweeter is in fact separate to the mid-range speaker. It's in the center of the mid-range driver, which is also another important advantage. Having a separate tweeter unit in the dead center of the mid-range driver in a dual concentric design means that you get pinpoint accurate stereo separation, incredible sound staging and super realistic imaging. There's also the time domain benefits and the off-axis response consistency that these dual concentric monitors provide. Basically, the 8-inch bass driver slams nice and deep, especially with the cleverly designed front-fire import, and it sounds smooth and natural. The mids are super clear and you don't get any of that woolly muddiness that often plagues 2-way designs, and the treble and tweeter is sweetly transparent without being fatiguing. Now, a little bit more about this unique front-fire import. Again, if you don't know about ported speaker designs and what they do, the porthole allows for deeper bass extension, but they aren't without their problems. Most ported monitors have a rear firing port, which can lead to problems as the wall directly behind them can have an adverse effect on the airflow, which can mess up the bass response. So to avoid this, a front firing port is generally a better idea, but there's more. Most ports are typically circular. Again, this can lead to issues. Kali have designed a letterbox shaped port along the bottom front of the speaker. This is supposed to help ensure that the air leaves the port at the same velocity, and after using them for a few months, I can say that Keylab are in the right ballpark with this design. I think it's great that Keylab have acknowledged that airflow from the port is important and gone out of their way to ensure that it stays laminar even at high volume levels, and it works rather well. Finally, there's the dip switches that Keylab have considerably put on the back. These allow you to make tiny adjustments to the sound depending on the placement of them in your studio. If they're close up against a back wall, sitting on your desk like I have here, or mounted on separate speaker stands away from the wall, there will be a dip switch setting that will get these monitors sounding good in pretty much any room of any size and shape. They've been incredibly well thought out, and after speaking to the Keylab designer on the phone for half an hour, I understand that they went to several studio locations to fine-tune these dip switches rather than just use some sort of computer model or calibration tool. The amount of time and effort that has gone into the design of these monitors is incredible given their low price. For me, at this price point, nothing else comes close for accurate mixing and mastering. Finally, if you're going to have your studio monitors mounted on the desk like I have here, I'd urge you to buy some decent desk isolation stands. If you're on a low budget, you can buy the pads from companies such as Universal Acoustics, who make the rather neat vibro pads, and they'll certainly get you part of the way there when it comes to isolating your monitors from the desk. But if you want to go the whole 9 yards, you'll have to spend a little more. Here, I'm using the ISO Acoustics ISO 200 stands, which come in at around £140. ISO Acoustics make these ISO stands in various sizes to suit different monitor sizes, and the ISO 200s are the size that are required for the Keylab IN8 monitors that I'm using here today. These stands have thick rubber on the top and bottom and a tough polycarbonate type frame with metal poles in between. They come with different size poles and end stoppers to allow you to get the monitors at the right height and angle to your ears. When it comes to setting up your monitors, you'll need to position them so that the tweeters are level with your ears and towed in slightly, forming a triangle between your head and the two monitors. But more on this a little later. Next comes the Midi keyboard controller. This is an important piece of studio gear as it's the part that you'll be physically touching more than anything else. So not only does the keyboard action have to feel right for playability, but so do the pitch and modulation wheels, the sliders, dials, switches and buttons. Now I have absolutely no idea why, but it would appear that most MIDI keyboard manufacturers just don't take MIDI keyboard controllers seriously, choosing instead to build them cheaply out of tacky plastics. It's as if some of these manufacturers treat MIDI keyboards like cheap computer peripherals, such as a £30 inkjet printer, for example. Honestly, some of the ones I've tried during the past 6 or 7 months have been appalling. And even some of the ones are from companies like Roland and Korg. The Roland A500 Pro feels like a cheap plastic toy. It's lightweight with no metal inside, and the keyboard action feels cheap and tacky also. It's kind of like the thing you'd expect to find in a 5-year-old's playroom more than something you'd expect to find in a recording studio. I can say the same for the Korg Triton Tactile MIDI keyboard controller, which comes in at a little more than the Roland at about £280, but again, it just feels like a cheap plastic piece of junk. I tried one of these out in my local music shop and it felt like I could have broken it over my knee without too much effort. Most of the M-Audio ones I tried were also terrible. The Nectar Panorama models felt incredibly cheap and nasty, and after taking delivery of the P6, the entire thing was actually warped. The keyboard literally had a hill in the middle as it dipped down towards the edges, due to probably the way the plastic had somehow curved, possibly during the cooling process at the factory, and to make things worse, the action was toy-like in playability. The Novation and Native Instrument offerings stepped things up a little bit in quality and playability, but even they were a little bit outside my comfort zone in build quality. I know that MIDI keyboards are not designed to be gigging instruments that would not be taken out on the road, so nobody would really expect the build quality to be right up there with something like a vintage Yamaha DX7, for example. But I still can't understand why most of them feel like cheap plastic toys, especially where some of them are actually taken out and gigged. You'll quite often find a synthesizer player that will head off out to a gig with an inner flight case and a laptop. The last MIDI keyboard that I had was an MKII Advanced 49, which was well made, had a nice keyboard with nice sliders and switches, with nice touchy pads, and it was almost perfect had it not been for the keyboard action. The action was great until you tried to play any of the white keys between the black ones, or close to the back of the keys themselves. Due to the pivot point being so far forward, the further back you tried to play any given key, the harder it became, which killed any chances of being able to perform an emotional interpretation that required a Mozart-type feel and response. Anyway, I recently discovered a French keyboard company called Arturia, and what a breath of fresh air they turned out to be. Arturia make a few different models of MIDI keyboard controller, as well as some fully fledged synthesizers too. So the model that I've decided to go with for my MIDI keyboard controller work is their amazing Keylab Mark II in the 49 key version that I've got here, which costs around £450. But once you take delivery of one and try it, you'll soon know where that money went. Of course, you can buy MIDI keyboard controllers at half this price, but as I've already mentioned, most of them just feel like cheap, plastic, tacky keyboards with terrible actions. The Arturia Keylab Mark II, on the other hand, is the Rolls-Royce of MIDI keyboard controllers. It's built like a tank, it's reassuringly heavy, and it's made out of an all-metal construction, and it even has these wooden inlays on the sides. The Keylab Mark II really does feel like a professional gigging synthesizer, the kind of thing that you could put in a flight case and tour with. It's that well built. In fact, the Keylab Mark II reminds me of my old Yamaha DX27 and some of those amazing vintage synths from the 80s with all their metal construction and high build quality. The main dial in the center here, the sliders and the pan pots and the pads all feel very professional with a nice tactile feedback. The pitch and modulation wheels are actually made out of metal, and they're very smooth to use with just the right amount of weight and resistance, while the keyboard action itself is actually the same as that Arturia use in their high-end £1,850 Matrix Brute analog synth, and what a great action it is too. It really is a pleasure to play this action. The Arturia Keylab Mark II that I have here also comes in a 61 key version, the latter coming in at about £50 more. Also, I just want to let you know that Arturia also make a budget MIDI keyboard controller called the Essential, which also comes in 49 and 61 key versions, and they cost £170 and £210 respectively. But these budget-friendly models are not to be confused with this more professional Keylab Mark II that I have here. Unlike the Keylab, with its solid metal construction, heavy weight and superior keyboard action, the Essential models are mostly made of plastic, they're much lighter and they have a different action. Having said that, if you don't have £450 to spend on the professional Keylab, then the Essential is still way better than most of the budget MIDI keyboard controllers out there, and certainly a lot better than most of the ones that I've mentioned already. The Keylab Mark II also has a cluster of 16 finger drum pads up here, and it has 10 buttons and 6 playback controls for your DAW, and it comes with magnetic templates for some of the most common DAWs too. This just actually removes, and you've got different templates on either side, and then it just drops back over the top of the keyboard like so. This is a great feature as it means you don't have to keep reaching for the mouse every 10 seconds. There are also 9 faders and activation buttons with lights under them and accompanying pan pots at the top. Okay, in the center of the console you'll find the main dial and menu display for changing the various settings and parameters, including choosing your DAW from the pre-configured list. There are also 3 other buttons that allow you to change between Analog Lab, DAW or User, which brings me nicely onto the best part of this superb MIDI keyboard controller. And that's just it. It's not just a MIDI keyboard controller, it's also a synthesizer. When you buy the Keylab Mark II, it comes bundled with Arturia's absolutely amazing analog synth models, with around 31 classic vintage synthesizers and thousands of sounds. Basically, Arturia have done for vintage analog synth modeling what UAD have done for guitar amp modeling. Some of you will know exactly what I mean by that, others might not. But if you don't, let me just say that nobody on the planet does analog synth modeling better than this company. Trust me on this, I've been around long enough and I've owned and used enough vintage analog synths back in the mid to late 80s, and I know. I've had enough hands-on experience with the real thing, and I can tell you that the sounds from Arturia's analog synths are about as good as it gets to the real thing. They really are that good. So if you've always fancied owning a vintage Yamaha CS80, but either couldn't find one or didn't fancy spending £10,000 on one when they rarely come up for sale second hand, no problem. The Arturia CS80 model is out of this world. In fact, if somebody stuck a gun to my head, I might even go as far as saying that it's indistinguishable from the real thing. Other classic synths include the world famous Prophet 5, Hammond B3, Yamaha DX7, OB-XA, and let's not forget the Jupiter 8 and Juno 6. And there are many others too. When using the Arturia Analog Lab 5 software, you simply hit the Analog Lab button on the keyboard and all the panpots, faders, buttons, pitch, modulation and others are automatically mapped to any given vintage synth that you select. By default, the free bundled synth sounds are all there to use, and sticking with the Yamaha CS80 for a minute, there are hundreds of sounds that various professional designers have come up with by adjusting all the various sliders, dials, buttons, parameters, settings, just as they would have if they had a physical CS80 in front of them. And most of these sounds are probably better than anything that you or I could come up with if we actually owned the physical synthesizer. These custom sounds are saved in the Analog 5 Synth software interface, and there are hundreds to choose from, and I suspect that most people will be more than happy with the hundreds upon hundreds of pre-created incredible sounds. However, if you've ever owned one of these vintage synths from back in the day and you want to get all nostalgic and start tweaking things for yourself, no problem. You can dig as deeply into all of these lovely knobs, sliders and dials with synths such as the Yamaha CS80, Emulator 2, Matrix 12 or any of the others via the actual virtual instrument to come up with all your own unique custom sounds. Just buy the full plugin for any given synth. Now, the full virtual instrument plugin does cost between 150 and 199 euros, but given the sheer amount of work that's gone into these, I consider them to be an absolute bargain. Also, comparing 199 euros to £10,000 for a used CS80, for example, well, it's a no-brainer. So with the Arturia Keylab Mark II, you're actually getting two for the price of one and much more on top. You're getting a professional grade MIDI keyboard controller to partner your DAW to perfection, and it integrates absolutely seamlessly, and you're also getting a fully fledged synthesizer with an amazing keyboard action that's very responsive and a dream to play. So if you're a gigging keyboard player, you can just put it into your flight case, grab your laptop and head off out to the venue with the software model equivalent of hundreds of thousands of pounds worth of vintage synthesizers. It's also worth remembering that some of these vintage synths can't even be bought second hand anymore, or they're very rare and hard to find, and they usually cost a fortune. Yamaha, for example, only ever made about 3,000 CS80s over a 3-year period during the late 70s. And there are a few studios out there who've probably bought up 2 or 3 of them. They really are that good. I know bands like Empire of the Sun are big fans of them. I think they own 2. Well, now you can too with the superb Keylab Mark II and Arturia's amazing synth models. Okay, so it might sound like I'm banging on about this keyboard and the Analog 5 software and the synth models, but they really are that good, and I think they're already becoming legendary. I know Noel Gallagher uses an Arturia Keylab with the Arturia V collection of synths personally, and he's blown away by what it can do. I'll put a link in the description below so that you can see the interview with Noel talking about the Arturia and demonstrating it. In fact, on Arturia's website, there's a massive list of well-known artists and producers who use their equipment. As usual, you'll find a link to Arturia's website in the description below, along with the other pieces of equipment that I'm talking about and demonstrating during this video. You're also going to need a set of headphones, or cans as I call them, more specifically closed back headphones. The difference between open back and closed back is that the latter blocks out sound from the outside world, and they also prevent audio from leaking out of the headphones too, which is vital when it comes to recording vocals. Firstly, when you or your singer is laying down the vocal track, you'll have to wear headphones so that you can hear the backing track to sing along to. Because you'll be singing into a microphone, you obviously won't be able to play the backing track through your monitors, or the sound coming out of the monitors will get picked up by the microphone, and you'll end up with a horrible echo of the backing track on your vocal track, which would sound ghastly. This is why closed back headphones are important, because your head is only going to be a few inches or so away from the microphone, and if you use open back headphones, you might get some audio leakage coming out of them, which will again get picked up by the microphone. Closed back headphones have little to no audio leakage, especially if you don't have the volume cranked up in your phones too high as they work in a similar way to those ear defenders that pile driver road workers wear. As with all the other equipment I've been talking about in this video so far, the headphones have been carefully researched, tested and considered. I did the same thing with the headphones, and I've been involved in recording engineering on and off for many years, so I have a lot of experience with various makes and models. As with the studio monitors, you don't want your headphones to colour the sound too much, and you definitely don't want to pop off down to the Apple store and buy a pair of Beats headphones because frankly, they're rubbish. They're for non-audiophiles that don't know any better, and I suspect the packaging and presentation of Beats headphones quite possibly cost just as much as the headphones themselves. They're loaded up with bass, the mids are muddy as hell, and the treble is tinnitus inducing, so steer well clear of those overpriced pieces of plastic junk. Especially given that there are professional studio grade monitor headphones that, believe it or not, cost a lot less. Thing is, these days certain manufacturers are all too keen to print buzzwords on the packaging of headphones such as professional or studio, but this doesn't necessarily make it so. I know a lot of video producers who love the Sennheiser HD25s, which cost about £120, and I've even owned these headphones myself, but I can't see what the big deal is about these headphones. I think a lot of guys, especially video producers, just get them because everybody else has them and everybody says how great they are. For me, they're average, and in fact, they're below average for professional studio monitoring and mixing purposes. Also, they're very uncomfortable for longer sessions as they sit very tightly on the ear and not over the ear. So the headphones I use, and I can't recommend enough, are the Biodynamic DT770 Pros, and more importantly, the 80 ohm version. Yes, they're available in impedances of 32, 80 and 250 ohms. The 32 ohm version is more for iPhones and iPods, things that only chuck out a tiny current to the headphones, so the 32 ohm versions are very easy to drive, but not what you would want in a recording studio. The 250 ohm version, in my opinion, are a little bit overkill and they require some kick from a professional mixing desk to get the best out of them. So for me, the 80 ohm version is the sweet spot. They still need a bit more current to drive them, but all audio interfaces will drive them easily, and when used with the Antelope Audio Discrete or Zen Go audio interfaces, the balance in audio levels, the headphone gain output from the sockets and the sound quality all add up to a marriage made in heaven. The DT770 Pros come in at around £120, and I've been using these for years. They're by far the most comfortable headphones you'll ever wear. They sit over the ear, encapsulating your ear entirely, and they're a nice snug fit without being overly tight. The sound quality is right up there. The bass response is deep, tight and controlled. The mids are nice and clear with no discernible woolliness, while the high frequencies are nice and clear without being overly bright. Perfect for mixing and mastering. Now, I know that some people might argue that mixing on headphones is an absolute no-no, but this is nonsense. Any professional, and I say professional recording engineer, will tell you that it's essential to mix and master using a combination of monitors and headphones these days. Why? Because you'll get a different perspective with the headphones. Stereo separation and automated panning will be greatly exaggerated in the headphones. You won't get any room reflections or room tone influence, and the whole flavour and mix will just come across in a different way, as the sound seems to come through within the centre of your head as opposed to in front of you from two stereo monitors. Also, about half, possibly more amongst the younger generation, listen to music on headphones, so you have to mix and master for that market too. So it's a case of getting a good balance. Your final mix should sound good when played back on any system, be it a £100,000 audiophiles hi-fi system, a more budget hi-fi system, a smart speaker such as a Sonos Play 5, the car stereo, and yes, headphones and earbuds too. So mix with your monitors for real-world sounds that bounce around your room, and then switch back and forth between the monitors and your headphones for a different musical perspective. And in between, take breaks, leave the room for a drink or a bite to eat, and it's important that you actually leave the room and go to another room that isn't acoustically treated so your ears can readjust. Also, it's a good idea to listen to your mix from outside the room in the corridor with the door slightly open. This gives another perspective on the mix, but more on that a little later. So anybody who tells you not to mix with headphones is talking absolute nonsense. You have to mix and consider the headphone generation. Next, I'm going to talk briefly about room treatment. Room treatment and poor monitor placement are probably the two things that let down about 90% of home recording studios. No acoustic room treatment or poor room treatment will suck up more than half the purchase price of your monitors, meaning your monitors won't sound anywhere near as good as their price tag suggests, and they just won't be able to shine to their full potential, not even close. Just pop into any restaurant that has a marble floor, stone walls, large windows and no curtains, and high ceilings, and listen to the ghastly sounds that are desperately trying to make music coming out of the poorly placed speakers that are randomly dotted around the walls and up in the corners. The reverberation, the reflections, the comb filtering effects, the total lack of anything that could resemble stereo imaging, it's absolutely horrible. The other end of this scale would be a professional recording studio with acoustic tiles and other treatments carefully considered and worked out, with monitors placed in the correct position in a triangular fashion to your head, with the tweeters level with your ears. Listening to music in a studio environment is a different acoustic story entirely. Room reflections, reverberation and comb filtering are all great big no-nos in the home recording studio, so you're going to have to invest a bit of money in this department, so don't flinch when I say it will cost you just shy of £400. Trust me on this, an acoustically treated room is an absolute must for mixing and mastering, and it's just as important as the monitors themselves. They go hand in hand. Remember, your monitors will only sound as good as the room they are in, and I'd much rather listen to a pair of £500 monitors in a well-treated room than a pair of £40,000 ATCs leaning up against a concrete pillar in St Paul's Cathedral. Of course, you can drape quilts and blankets all over the walls, and that will get you part of the way there, but this will often totally dry the room out, and it can make things sound worse, as you don't want too much coverage. Also, forget about egg boxes, I won't even go down that road. To do it properly, I'd suggest investing in a Universal Acoustics room treatment kit, such as their MKII system, which I've installed here on the walls behind me. The kit will arrive in a great big box containing 40 wall wedges, 4 bass traps, 2 cans of spray mist adhesive and installation instructions. Also, the guys at Universal Acoustics are brilliant. You can phone them or email them anytime for advice. Here's a few tips. Some people make the mistake of covering every inch of wall space, including the ceiling, which results in a totally dead, flat, dry and unnatural sound. Somewhere between 35 and 50% coverage is what's generally required for a good balance and to retain a little bit of natural room tone. However, the tiles do have to be strategically placed around the walls, corners and ceilings to be effective. But this is not as difficult as some people make it sound, pun intended. Having your room treated is a necessity, especially when it comes to recording vocals, as without room treatment, you'll almost certainly end up recording too much room reverb along with the vocals, and this is something that's next door to impossible to remove during the editing stage. It's much easier to add reverb via an effects plugin than it is to remove it. Universal Acoustics are based in Milton Keynes in the UK, and the MKII acoustic room kit at £390 should be enough for most small to medium home recording studios. Apart from being acoustically perfect products, I love the fact that Universal Acoustics have thought up some really cool ideas in other areas too, such as the wedges are all cut flat across the tops so they don't perish and frizzle away over time, and if you've got any kids, they won't be able to pick pointy bits off them. They also come in different colours which don't fade over time. I can vouch for this, as I've had these ones here installed for nearly 5 years now, and the sunlight streams in through the window during the mornings on most days, and for safety concerns, yes, they're fire retardant. If you pop on over to the Universal Acoustics website, I'll put the link in the description below, you'll find tips on the correct placement for the tiles and bass traps, and you can even download their free acoustic room treatment guide that has a diagram that demonstrates where to place the acoustic tiles. You should look at your room as another piece of equipment, and a vital one at that, as the room has just as much effect on the sound as the monitors themselves. You're also going to need a few accessories such as cables. Let me tell you right now that there's absolutely no difference in audio performance between cheap and expensive XLR cables, none whatsoever. If you plug in a £7 cable and compare it to a £100 cable, you won't hear any difference at all. I know, I've tested loads of them over the years. When you pay more for a cable, you're not paying for better sonic performance, you're paying for other things that are just as important, and some do actually have a knock-on effect on the audio. More expensive cables will generally have better shielding to reject radio and electrical interference, and the quality of the cable materials will also generally be better, so they'll last longer and won't break so easily, and they'll generally have better quality connectors made out of higher quality materials that are better constructed so they won't snap off and get stuck inside your microphone. When it comes to cables, don't skimp on the price, but you don't have to go crazy expensive either. But remember that cheap nasty cables generally have poorer shielding from both electrical and radio interference, and they'll usually be made of questionable materials, and the sockets are often of poor construction. This means that with the cheap nasty cables, you might get some electrical or radio interference finding its way into your recording signal, especially if the cable runs alongside a phone charger, for example. Also, I've spoken to repair engineers at Neumann and Sennheiser over the years, and in the past you'd be surprised at the amount of times they get sent a microphone to repair because part of a cheap XLR socket from the end of a budget cable had snapped off inside the microphone. For these reasons, spend a bit more and get a quality cable with quality connectors on the ends with decent shielding. The brands I always recommend are made by Megami and Klotz. You can't go wrong with either of these brands. I have short Megami XLR to jack cables going from the Antelope audio interface to the Kali monitors, a Megami XLR to XLR microphone cable, and a Megami guitar cable with a right angle jack on one end. I also have Klotz cables in the same configuration, so I can personally vouch for both these brands, and either should last a long time. I would say that the Megami cables are a little bit thicker and therefore heavier than the Klotz, but this doesn't necessarily mean that they're better constructed. It's just that they use different cable materials, especially for the outer cover. I love the Megami cables for my monitors and the microphone, as these cables generally stay put and don't move around. But for my bass guitar, I generally prefer the Klotz, as it's just a bit thinner and it just falls from the bass and flows across the floor easier, whereas the Megami, being thicker, they just kind of coil their way down to the floor and don't flow quite as nicely. It's just a small thing, but something to consider. These cables come in at between £15 and £40 each, so you should be able to kit out your studio with monitor cables, a mic cable and guitar cable for about £120. When it comes to the mic stand, again, don't buy a dodgy cheap brand, as it will probably be a bit on the rickety side, and it will only cost about £20 more to buy a decent one anyway. You'll want a solid mic stand to support the mic and suspension mount, and preferably one with a quick release adjuster for adjusting the height. Having a boom is not so important in the studio environment, but the mic stand I'd recommend, the one I use myself, comes with a boom anyway. I just don't use it, so I've removed it and packed it away in the cupboard. The one I use is made by Hercules, and the model is the MS531B, and it costs £65. A little bit more than usual, admittedly, but it's a really solid mic stand that's easy to set up and claps down. It has a quick release mechanism for adjusting the height, and it's really well built. As usual, I'll put a link in the description to this make and model where you can look at it at your leisure. Okay, I'm just going to throw this out there because I think, well, actually I know that these few book recommendations will really help you on your journey with understanding and getting the best out of your home recording studio. I personally use Apple's Logic Pro digital audio workstation software, and if you decide to go down the same route, I can't recommend David Nemani's book Logic Pro X from the Apple Pro Training Series. At about £45, it's not cheap admittedly, and it doesn't even come with a CD, but given that CDs are all but dead in the water, I can understand this. But if you buy the book, all you have to do is create an account with your name and email address to be able to download and use all the project files that are required for the 10 walkthrough lessons, and you also get access to a digital version of the book online, which means you can flick from Logic to a browser page to follow the tutorials. This book will give you a really good grounding of Logic Pro and how to use it. The project lessons are fun as the author walks you through various edits during a mix of an actual song from the downloaded project files. Having said that, if you follow the 10 individual lessons in the walkthrough style that the author's created, it ends up being a little bit monkey see, monkey do, and you won't really develop a deep understanding of what you're doing. For example, after opening one of the project files, the author might say, click on the compressor plugin, then click on the classic VCA button, and then turn the threshold dial down to a -30, for example, and then turn the ratio up to 8 and have a listen. You'll notice ... And this is how the entire book is formatted. So what I'd suggest is once any given lesson is over, don't be so keen to open the next lesson straight away. Instead, stick around in that lesson you've just completed and go back into it and spend half an hour or so digging around in the settings that the author walked you through and make other adjustments and change other things to see what effects they have on the sound, and try and develop an understanding of what you're actually doing rather than just following along in a monkey see, monkey do painting by numbers style. For example, when I followed the volume automation section, after I'd created the automated volume fade up and fade down as per the book instructions, I stuck around and started creating volume automations on other parts of the track. Then I created a few pan automations just to get a better understanding of it. There's a huge difference between just following along passively while your brain receives this information, where the brain isn't really working that hard at all, and changing a parameter or setting yourself without being told what to do via the book, as this gets the brain thinking as you create yourself. And this is where the understanding really comes in. Also, if you're not sure what something is, just Google it. If you don't know what a flanger effect is, just type into Google, "what's a flanger in music production?" and you'll get a nice technical explanation. Doing things like this will help you join all the dots and give you a more complete understanding of the software. If you decide to go with another DAW, not Logic Pro, then I'd still recommend doing a bit of research on Amazon to find a decent tutorial book or two and work through them, because these DAWs can be quite deep and there's a lot to learn, and they can start to get a little bit overwhelming to start with. The other two books that I'm going to recommend are nothing to do with digital audio workstation software. They're both by a gentleman called Mike Senior, who worked for Sound on Sound magazine in Cambridge in the UK. Mike's an absolute authority on the subject, so his books, Recording Secrets for the Small Studio and Mixing Secrets for the Small Studio, come highly recommended. Mike's Mixing Secrets book is a must also, and this book goes into much more depth regarding mixing than David's Logic Pro tutorial does. Okay, so I've covered the various pieces of hardware that I'm using here. So what I'm going to do now is just quickly go through how it is physically connected up to the computer and configured, which is a fairly straightforward and painless affair. So on the iMac, I've got Logic Pro, the DAW, installed and set up. Underneath that, I've got the Antelope Audio Discrete 4 audio interface. This is plugged into the computer directly with a Thunderbolt cable. You can use USB as well, and if you decide to go for the Zengo, I believe that's USB only. But whichever audio interface you go for and whichever method of connection you go for, I would always use one of the Thunderbolt or USB sockets directly onto the computer rather than using a hub. If you haven't got a spare socket on the back of the computer, then maybe shuffle some things around. Try moving the printer out of the socket and use the printer in a hub so that you can plug the audio interface directly into one of the computer sockets instead. I find that this will just yield a more stable system. So that's how the audio interface is connected. It's fairly straightforward. However, it's not quite plug and play. After all, it's not like a hi-fi peripheral, so it's not like plugging a CD player into an amplifier, popping the CD in and hitting play and just hearing music. It is a piece of computer hardware, which means it requires a piece of computer software. So we are going to have to pop along to the Antelope Audio website and download the Antelope Launcher and control panel software, which again is a breeze. So let me just hop onto the computer now and show you how that works. Okay, so once the Antelope audio interface is physically connected to your computer, you can pop on over to the Antelope website and click on this support button here, which opens this page. We've got various downloads here. We've got some really good video tutorials, and Antelope Audio have also got their own YouTube channel as well, which I'd recommend having a look at and subscribing to. But what we're going to click on here is the Download Launcher button, which will then download the Antelope Launcher software, which you're going to need for making various changes and settings to the audio interface. This is on a Mac. We all know how this installation process works, so I won't go through that. But once you've got this installed, you will then have the Antelope Launcher software on your computer. And when you click on it, you will be presented with this. It's a nice clean interface here, some device info that shows you the firmware version, the serial number, a few of little bits and pieces here. We've also got the plugins window, so any plugins that you've installed from the Antelope website will show up here, and that's where they're configured. And then we've got the system window. Again, I'm only going to be brief with this because there's some more in-depth tutorials on the Antelope YouTube channel and website. But basically here we've got, this is where you start the main control panel by either clicking on this red section here or by clicking on the actual audio interface button here. If you check this box here for auto run control panel, it will do what it says on the tin. Whenever you launch this, it will automatically launch the control panel, which I'm going to do now by clicking on this icon here. When you click on this, it will launch the main control panel, which takes somewhere between 3 and about 10 seconds, depending on the speed of your computer, because it's got to do a few bits and pieces in the background. And then you will be presented with this window here. As you can see, it's a nice, clean interface. It just, you know, self-explanatory. We've got the 4 inputs here. With my discrete 4 Synergy core, inputs 1 and 2 are on the front. The actual jack sockets are on the front of the audio interface, whereas 3 and 4 are on the back. As you can see, on number 3, I've got a Sennheiser MK4, which is what I'm talking into right now. But this is where you make various settings for your gain input. We've got the clock here, which by default is set to internal. You can change the sample rate here as well. 44.1 and 48 are the two that I normally use, but you can go up to 96 and even 192 in here also. And then this is where you can turn on and off the phantom power by clicking on this button here, or you can click on this cog and turn it off there. We've got the digital outs here for setting up various parameters. Again, I won't go into great detail because on the Antelope YouTube channel, there's a few videos on there that go into this in much more detail. We've got the analog outs here, and then we have the DAW. So just coming back to the main monitor and headphone one here, this is also where you have your AFX settings for these 4 channels. So if I click on this one here, which is where I'm actually connected to right now, it will bring up this window where you can add any of the plugins that you might have downloaded from the Antelope website. We've got some great vintage EQs, compressors, preamps, guitar amp, and various other bits and pieces. So for example, if I just click this various speed tremolo, as I talk, la, you can hear the various effects that's producing. If I had a space flanger, for example, then that's going to change it further still. Let me just go to a compressor and add this FET A78. Let me also add, just for the purposes of demonstration, this rock guitar amp effect here. I think I'll bypass this one. By clicking on that bypass button, I can click on that bypass button for the compressor, leaving just these 2 running. Or you can bypass all of them by clicking on this button here. To change these or to remove or add, you simply click on this, and then I can just remove them by clicking here, and then I can just sort of go in and add anything that I want to add specifically. So that's where you make all the changes for adding and removing any effects plugins. So that is basically the main control panel where you make all the various changes to the audio interface. As you can see, it's nice and clean and easy to use. Next come the monitors. So the 2 monitors here simply plug into the Antelope audio interface. I'm using Megami cables that have got XLR sockets on one end and jacks on the other. So the XLR end plugs into the monitor inputs, whereas the jack end plugs into the Antelope audio outputs. So you've got monitor outputs on the back of this, which is how they plug in. So that's all fairly straightforward and easy. Next we have the keyboard. This is the Arturia Keylab. This just plugged into the computer using a USB cable. This is like the USB cables you get with printers, so nothing complicated there. Again, try and plug it into one of the USB sockets directly onto the computer rather than using a hub if you can, just for stability purposes. The only other cable I've got coming out of the back here that you might have noticed is a sustain pedal for when I'm using this as a piano and I might need sustain. That's it. I'm not going to go into too much detail on the keyboard at the moment because a little later on I'm going to go into more detail on setting this up, the software and the various synthesizer software packages and that kind of thing. The only other thing is the microphone. At the moment I've got a Sennheiser MK4 plugged into the input number 3 on the back of the discrete 4. I've got 4 inputs on this, 1 and 2 are on the front, and I've got 3 and 4 on the back. I've got the microphone plugged into number 3 on the back, simply because I never unplug it, so the cable goes out the back, runs up the wall, over the door, and down to the microphone stand, and the microphone, which is just out of shot to the right of the camera. So that is plugged in all the time, which leaves me a spare one on the back, and I've got these 2 sockets on the front that I can plug electric guitars and basses and things like that into. So with regard to the monitors, just quickly, I've mentioned already that there are various dip switches on the back, but there's instructions on the back of the speaker and in the manual that show you how to set those dip switches depending on the environment and the room shape, and whether you got the monitors mounted on a desk like I do here, or whether they're on stands behind the desk or up on a console, how close they are to the wall, how far away, that kind of thing. Like I said, in the manual, it shows you how to set those dip switches for any given environment, so they will sound good in pretty much any room. Again, for the isoacoustic stands I've got here on the desk, these are great. They come with different size poles, so you can make them higher or lower. They come with poles about that tall as well, so I could get the top part of the speaker up to about here if I use the longer poles. And you do have these little stopper sections that you can pop into the bottom, so you can actually tilt the speaker down towards you, or you can tilt it away. So if you've got them higher up, you can tilt them down, or if you've got them low down, you can tilt them up a bit. But either way, the tweeter here should be level with your ears. Otherwise, if the tweeters were up here, those high frequencies are going to go over your head and they won't be bright and transparent. They'll be a little bit kind of lacking and a little bit woolly. So you always want to aim to have the tweeter level with your ear exactly when you're in the seating position. The only other thing with the monitors is that they've got to be towed in. So instead of having them flat and coming out, you basically have it facing your ear. So when you're in the center, this tweeter will be pointing straight towards this ear, and this one will point straight towards this one. So you're forming a triangle. So the distance between these 2 tweeters and your ears should be about the same. So you form a perfect triangle with them towed in, pointing towards each ear, with the tweeter level with your ear, so you're going to get the best possible sound from them. So that's pretty much it. As you can see, it's fairly straightforward to set up, nothing too complicated at all. Okay, I mentioned at the beginning that if you decide to go with Logic Pro as your DAW, that the abundance of included FX plugins will probably suffice. Having said that, there are 2 that I want to highly recommend, and for slightly different reasons. Both are related to singing and vocal work. The first is Auto-Tune, and I'm talking about the original one developed by Antares, the one that was used on Cher's track Believe back in 1998, where the Auto-Tune plugin parameters were set to maximum to get that exaggerated step in as it robotically steps through the scale from one sung note to the next. Now, the reason I'm recommending this plugin is not necessarily to auto-tune the singer's voice, i.e. to get the pitch perfect, although it does a brilliant job of fixing pitch, but it's to get that brilliant vocal effect that you can achieve. Cher's Believe being one prime example, or pretty much any track by Daft Punk that has vocals. Just have a listen to some Daft Punk tracks and you'll hear that familiar robotic vocal sound with hard, definitive steps from one sung note to the next. There's so much more that you can do with Antares Auto-Tune software, and there are various packages that you can look at on their website. You don't have to buy the Auto-Tune Pro at $399, Auto-Tune Access at $99 or EFX Plus at $199 will suffice, as these do incredible vocal effects. I'll also be giving you a sample demonstration of Antares Auto-Tune a little bit later on in this video. The next one is every top recording studio's closely guarded secret. It's a piece of software developed by a company called Celemony, and it's called Melodyne. There are 3 versions of Melodyne ranging from €99 to €399. I'd recommend Melodyne 5 Assistant, which costs €249, and it will do everything that you need for your vocals. The more expensive options just add the ability for multiple tracks and other instruments, features that you won't necessarily need when you're doing just a single vocal track. Melodyne works as a standalone piece of software, or you can use it as a plugin directly in your DAW. Melodyne is basically a piece of software that allows you to manipulate the pitch, timing, note duration, and even the format of your vocal tracks to perfection on a note-by-note basis. When it comes to laying down vocal tracks, a good performance with accurate timing are key, but not every vocalist, including many famous ones, can nail the timing, even on several takes, so this is where Melodyne comes in. Melodyne not only allows you to adjust the timing of each sung note by moving it a semiquaver or a fraction of a semiquaver sooner, it also allows you to adjust the pitch of each note to the very smallest tolerance, or incomplete steps of the scale, but there's a whole ton more to what Melodyne does, all of which I'll cover during a brief tutorial a little later on. But if you're serious about your singing, Melodyne is an absolute must, and there's very few commercial hit records out there that haven't been through Melodyne. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to give you an introduction, a brief overview and a quick tutorial on some of the things that Melodyne does. Now, if you're a singer or you record any kind of vocals, trust me on this, you're going to need Melodyne. Top recording studios around the world use this as their secret weapon for perfect vocal tracks. I'm just going to quickly show you the Melodyne website. I'll put a link in the description below so you can go over and have a look at it to see exactly what this software does. They've got a great help section here, and I recommend that you click on these videos by Rich. He goes into more detail and some of the more intricacies of what Melodyne does with these short video tutorials. They're really good. There is a free 30-day trial version, and if I just click on the shop tab, I will show you here that there's 3 different versions of Melodyne: the Essential, the Assistant and the Editor at €99, €249 and €399. For most of us, the Essential at €99 or the Assistant at €249 will be perfectly fine, especially if you only do vocals. But again, I'll put a link in the description below so you can have a look at the differences for yourself. Okay, having said that, it's always best to try and nail the best possible vocal performance you can, with great emotion or passion, with fantastic timing and great pitch, all those things, even making a comp out of several takes before running it through Melodyne. Okay, so Melodyne works as either a plugin or a standalone piece of software. So here I'm going to be using it in Logic, and I'm choosing the ARA option for the plugin, which is the Audio Random Access, which is an audio plugin extension like VST, and it simply allows them to exchange a greater amount of audio information with the DAW. Now, if you use Logic already, you're probably thinking, why don't I just use Flex Pitch? Because it's built in after all. But for me, Flex Pitch is no good. In fact, I would even go as far as to say it's rubbish. I love Logic as a DAW, it's fantastic, but Flex Pitch is not one of the things I use within it. Just the act of opening Flex Pitch can introduce some nasty digital artifacts, and it often does. And I've never been able to edit more than just 2 or 3 sentences before Flex Pitch will actually introduce a popping noise or a crackle or some other nasty, horrible digital artifact that you can hear. And it actually degrades the quality of the vocal track too, whereas Melodyne doesn't. It retains all the quality, it doesn't degrade it, and on top of that, Melodyne just does so much more anyway. Okay, so here I've got a couple of audio files that I've sung in just so I can use to demonstrate Melodyne. I'll just play you the beginning of this first one. Okay, I'll turn the click track on for this as well, because most of the notes that I sing are syncopated. Not many of them actually land on the beat. This is just a couple of sentences from a song that I wrote a couple of years back, but just have a listen. $1 billion in the bank, not a single person left to shank. Okay, I'll turn the metronome off. So again, we have $1 billion in the bank, not a single person left to shank. Okay, and the other audio file that I've got here is just me singing the first couple of sentences from the Oasis song Wonderwall. Today is gonna be the day that they're gonna throw it back to you. By now you should have somehow realised what you gotta do. Okay, so they're the 2 tracks that I'm going to use to demonstrate Melodyne, just short little phrases. So if I go and click on the Melodyne plugin, the first time you click on the plugin, like any other plugin, Melodyne will analyze that audio and it will basically interpret it as this. It literally only takes a couple of seconds to analyze the whole track. Now, these slug-like shapes actually represent the notes, and the wavy lines inside them represent variations within the note pitch, such as vibrato. Okay, so let me just play this so you can see it on this plugin. $1 billion in the bank, Now there you can hear that I'm singing a billion in the bank, and if I actually click on these notes, then you'll hear that sung note as well. A billion in the bank. A billion in the bank. So there we go. Now some of these notes are a little bit out of tune. This first note here should be an E. Now down the left hand side we've got this piano keyboard with the corresponding horizontal lines so that you can see where the note should be. So this first sung note, instead of it being bang on E, it's actually halfway between E and E flat. So I am singing it a little bit flat. Now there's a couple of ways that I can get this note into tune. I can double click it, and that will basically snap it to the nearest note. Now it's actually put it too flat. I'm just going to undo that. Now that's my fault because I've obviously sung it closer to E flat than I have to E. So when I double click it, Melodyne's just putting it there. Another way of getting it into the exact center of this E is by holding down the Option key and dragging it. Like that. Because as I drag... that's what happens. Also, another way of doing it is you can double click it, but then when it snaps it to the wrong note, you can just click it without holding any Option key and just drag. Because then it drags in complete steps. Whereas if I'd have left it here where it's slightly flat and tried to just drag it without holding down the Option key, we get this. So it'll snap it, but this time it's going to snap it and make it sharp. So I'm just going to double click it and then drag it to where it should be. So that's one way of getting a note into pitch. Another way is to simply select a group of notes or select all of them and double click. So when I do that, it's going to snap all those into place. Now, if we have a listen now, we have a billion in the bank. That's fine. Some of these notes are a little bit out. So if I just double click those to put those in and maybe double click that one. A billion in the bank. Not a single person left to shank. Okay, that's sounding pretty good. Maybe that one can come down a little bit. Yep, and this one and this one. Just double click in here. Now let's have a listen. A billion in the bank, not a single person left to shank. There we go, that's all sounding pretty good. Right, so I'm just going to show you a couple of other quick things here. You may have noticed these little vertical lines at the beginning and ending of some notes here. That is sibilance. So if I just click up here for a second, over here on the left we've got this little checkbox, and if I uncheck it, they actually disappear. And if I check it, it actually brings them back again. So that is basically just sibilance. So that is where I'm singing notes beginning with S. So I'm getting notes like sh, s, sh, s. It's those kind of sounds. That's what they represent. It's not actually note. Now, we all know that sibilance is the enemy when it comes to vocals, but you don't want to get rid of them entirely because it shows that we're human, but they shouldn't be front and center stage either. So the volume of the sibilant parts should be reduced. Now, a lot of people would just use a de-esser in their DAW. I'm not a fan of using de-essers simply because it affects the whole tonal range of every sung word. A lot of professionals will actually slice out all these little sibilance parts with the S's and the sh and that kind of stuff. They will just move them down onto a separate track and then reduce the volume of that track just for the sibilance parts. But in Melodyne, it's really easy. So if I just double click here to get rid of the loop, which we can do within Melodyne, as you can see, if I double click on this bit here, it brings up the loop bar, and in Logic, we have it there. So I can actually click it in Logic to get rid of it, or I can double click it here and basically put it where I want to put it. Let me just drag that back out there, like so. Right, okay, so what I'm going to do now is show you how this sibilance tool works. So I'm just going to start it from here. So just have a listen to it where we have the S's coming in here. Not a single person left to shank. So we've got the S of single and from person and shank here again. Not a single person left to shank. So if I want to reduce the sibilance for all those, all I have to do is drag over them and then come up here to the sibilance tool, which is here, sibilance balance. And then if I click on any of these little vertical line bits and drag up or down, it's going to adjust all of them. So if I take this middle one, for example, and drag down, you'll see that they all came down. So have a listen now. Not a single person left to shank. Now that's maybe a little bit too much, so if I just undo that, and just this time I'm just going to drag it about halfway. To about there. Not a single person left to shank. That's sounding much better. So that is how you deal with sibilance. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to close this one down and come down to this next track and play it without Melodyne. Today is going to be the day that they're going to throw it back to you. Okay, that will do for that. Now if I open the Melodyne plugin, you can see we have it here. We just turn on this section 1 sec. There we go. I'm just going to bring in a loop right to the end of this part here. Today is going to be the day that they're going to throw it back to you. Right, okay, so looking at the beginning here, I can see that some of these notes are a little bit out. That should be a G, so if I double click it and then drag it to where it should be. Today is going to be the day that... And some of these notes are a little bit out. They're not all exactly in line, so let me just double click on these and see what happens. It's put them all in the right place. It's set that one. So I'm going to drag that down, and same here. They all need to be in the same place. That's it. That one needs to come up. Let's have a listen now. Today is going to be the day that they're going to throw it back to... Oops, that one needs to... Let's have a listen now. Today is going to be the day that they're going to throw it back to you. Okay. So that is all sounding really good. And the next section, if I double click the loop bar to get rid of it for a minute. By now you should have somehow realised what you got. That note there is a bit low, needs to come up. Yeah, I do. By now you should have somehow realised what you gotta do. Okay, that's sounding okay. Maybe just bring this one down a bit. Yeah. Now this one here... Let me just play this for you. By now you... Okay, now that actually should be a B, but I actually sing up to that. You can see that the wavy line here, that's me singing up to that note. But here at the beginning, if I just play this bit... Today... And then from here... By now... So that should still be a B. It should still be on the B line. But as you can see, there's a lot of me sort of rising up into the note. So if I drag this one up... So if I put it to B where it should be, it will sound odd. Have a listen. To you. By now you... So we've got this big spike. Now I can get rid of that by simply using the... Where are we? The pitch modulation tool here. So with the pitch modulation tool, what this does is it basically reduces the amount of vibrato and waviness within a line. So I can bring this down by holding down the Option key and dragging. Bye. Now I could make it totally flat. Bye. Bye. But I want to leave a little bit of natural vibrato in there, so have a listen now. To you. By now you should have somehow... So now it's in the right pitch, it's where it should be, but the way I sing by, it sounds like a little bit chipmunky. Have a listen again. To you. By now. We have this by with this weird bit at the end of by. Now I can get rid of that because this is where the formant tool comes in. Now the formant tool is basically all to do with the timbre and the colour and the tonality of your voice. It's all to do with like throat shape and mouth shape, whether you're singing from the chest, neck or head, all that kind of stuff. So the formant is not going to change the actual note, but it's going to change the timbre and mouth shape of it. So let me just play it again before I make any adjustment. You. By now you... So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring that formant down a bit. To about there. Now have a listen. Back to you. By now you should have somehow... So that actually helps fix how that sounds. So that's now all in tune and how it should be. Let me just show you something at the end here. This end note, if I want to actually make that longer, I'll show you how to do that. Realize what you gotta do. Again. Gotta do. So if I want to make that note longer and hold it a bit longer, I can simply click on the tool up here called the time tool, and holding down the option, I can just drag the end of the note like this. So it would sound like... What you gotta do. And if I undo that, it's... That's what you gotta do. I can make it shorter. That's what you gotta do. Or I can make it longer. Realize what you gotta do. Okay, let me just zoom in on this beginning bit here. And what I want to show you now is if I click here on the pitch modulation tool, it brings up these little yellow handles. And if I hold the mouse near the right-hand edge of any of these notes, it turns into a little cross, as you can see. And then what I can do is I can drag these up or down. If I drag it down, this is affecting how one note basically transitions into another. So if I put it there, I'm just going to have this nice kind of glissando down into the next note. Whereas if I have it straight, when I get to the end of this song note, it's just going to drop straight into the next note quickly. So if I hover over all these and then just make an adjustment like this, just to make them all hard sounding, have a listen to this. Let me just bring back the... there we go. I'm just going to bring this back to the beginning section. Today is going to be the day that they're going to throw it back to you. And then if I change that and make it like this, so they just flow into each other, have a listen now. Today is going to be the day that they're going to throw it back to you. And again. Today is going to be the day that they're going to throw it back to you. And then if I change that to this. Today is going to be the day that they're going to throw it back to you. You can hear that the transition between the notes flows nicer when I make this adjustment. Today is going to be the day that they're going to throw it back to you. So this just affects how one note transitions into the next as you kind of glissando in and out of notes, if that makes sense. Let me just put that back to there. Okay, just a couple more quick things to show you. The next one is the amplitude tool that changes the volume of any given note. You can make the volume higher or lower. So if I felt this note here was a little bit too loud, I can simply click on the amplitude tool up here and I can reduce that volume. Or make it louder. So we have this. Today is day. Today is good day. Today is day. Today is good day. Today is gonna be the day that day. Today is gonna be the day that they're gonna throw it back. Throw back. Today is going to be the day that they're going to throw it back to you. Okay, so that's just a way you can even out some notes that might be sung a little bit too loud, for example. Now, if you use Apple, you will know that you can just use the Apple Z, Command Z on the keyboard to undo different stages of the edit. So if I undo that and undo that, it will undo things. But if there's something quite far back that you want to undo, but you don't want to undo everything else, you can simply right-click on any given note, and I could basically go along to pitch and click Restore to Original, or the Formant tool and restore that, or the Amplitude tool, and I can just go back here and just restore that. So if I click it, it's just going to put that one note back. So you can undo individual note history rather than having to continuously click on the Command Z button repeatedly until you get back to the stage. Because like I said, you might not want to undo lots of things, but just something individually. So you can do that too. Okay, so that was a brief overview of just a few of the things that you can do in Melodyne, but it does way more than I've touched upon here. Again, I'd recommend going over onto their website and having a click on these videos under the help section that Rich Crescenti has put together, because he does a really good job of going into detail, and he covers a lot more than what I have here. As you can see here, there's probably about an hour's worth of videos. So if you watch those, you'll get a much better insight into what Melodyne could do. So there it is. That's Melodyne. Can't recommend it enough. Okay, so I'm just going to give you a quick demonstration of the Auto-Tune software. Now, the company that made the one I use, because various people make it, is made by Antares. Now, I like this one. I think it's the best. It's the original one. It's the one that was used on the Shure track, Believe, back in 1998. It's one that's used by a lot of artists. T-Pain, the American rapper, uses this. So do Daft Punk and many R&B singers. So it's made by Antares. They make several different versions. So I'm just going to quickly open up the different plugins that they do. They do this one here, which is called Auto-Tune Pro. And then they do this next one called Auto-Tune Artist. And finally, they do Auto-Tune EFX. Now, if I just bring up quickly the browser, the Auto-Tune Pro you'll see here is $399. Auto-Tune Artist is $299, and Auto-Tune EFX Plus is $199. On the website, the Antares website, they've got this comparison showing you what the key differences are between them with this table down here at the bottom. So you can have a little scroll through these at your leisure. But there's just a few key little differences here. So let me get rid of these, and then I can just quickly jump into this demonstration. Now, basically, although Auto-Tune does what it says on the tin, it actually fixes sharp or flat notes and it puts your voice perfectly into tune, and it does a great job of that. A lot of people use it for that, but ironically, more people these days use it for an effects plugin, like what people like to call the Shure effect or the T-Pain effect, with this hard tuning robotic sound. So that's what I'm going to concentrate on for this brief tutorial, just so I can give you a bit of science behind this plugin, because a lot of people don't use it right, because a lot of it is down to the way you sing to give Auto-Tune something to do, so you get that robotic step-in effect. Okay, so I've got a few audio files here that I've pre-recorded, nothing special, just me singing a couple of scales and a few random bits, so I can demonstrate the correct way of using this plugin if you want to get the Shure or the T-Pain effect with that hard step-in robotic sound. Now this retune speed here, if you've got this set to minimum, Auto-Tune is not going to be doing anything at all. It's just going to basically leave it as is. Whereas if you turn it to maximum, it's going to be on overdrive. It's going to basically create hard steps between the sung notes, and that's basically how you get the T-Pain effect with that robotic sound. You can put it about halfway, and when it's halfway, Auto-Tune will gradually do a slight glissando into and out of the note, so it's not quite so obvious. So what I'm going to do here, I'm just going to solo off this track and let you have a listen to this. This is nothing special, it's just me singing a scale in A major over 1 octave, so just have a quick listen. La 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 la. Okay, so nothing special, just a scale. Now I'm just going to turn Auto-Tune on so you can have a listen. Now you're not going to notice any difference here, but what I want you to do is look at the notes on the bottom, and you'll see it start on A and finish on A, and it will go through the notes of the A major scale. So here we go. La 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 la. Now, the reason Auto-Tune didn't make any difference, even though I've got the retune speed on maximum and you didn't get that T-Pain effect, is because I sung that scale perfectly, and there's nothing for Auto-Tune to do because every note was sung perfectly in tune and there was no glissando. So basically, I'm singing it in steps. I'm singing la 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 rather than la, if that makes sense. So what I'm going to do now, I'm just going to turn this off, close that one, and come up here to this top track where there's a few more examples, and I'm going to open the Auto-Tune plugin for this. Now what I want you to listen to is this, because what I do this time, I sing a scale in G major, but instead of singing it stepped, like a la 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 la, I sing it as a glissando. Have a listen. La. A little bit strange, I know, but let me turn Auto-Tune on, and it's on maximum overdrive here. Now have a listen. La. So you can hear what it's doing. Now, if I just sort of put that back to the beginning and turn the retune speed about halfway, have a listen now. La. it's a little bit more subtle, and then back to maximum. La. Okay, I'm just going to turn that off for the next example. La. Which was a little bit quicker. Let me turn auto-tune on for that. La. And again, if I put the retune speed about halfway, then auto-tune is going to basically put in a little bit of a glissando into the note and out of it, so you haven't got such an abrupt change. La. So that sounds a little bit more natural, but back on maximum overdrive and you have La. And then turning auto-tune off. La. Okay, so let me just play you this next bit here. You'll probably recognize this Black Eyed Peas song. I'm going to play it with no auto-tune. I got a feeling that tonight's gonna be a good night. That tonight's gonna be a good night. That tonight's gonna be a good night. Okay, now I'm going to turn auto-tune on. And what you're going to be listening for here is the bits towards the end, especially around here. Good night. As I sing down, as I sing the word night, I'm singing night. I'm kind of stepping down these bits. That tonight's gonna be a good night. Good night. Good night. Good night. So it's those, when I say the word night at the end, that's what you want to be listening for now. I'm going to turn auto-tune on. I got a feeling that tonight's gonna be a good night. That tonight's gonna be a good night. That tonight's gonna be a good night. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to bring this across here to this section. Good. There, let me just bring that to about there, just so I can isolate this section. So without auto-tune. Good night. Good night. Good night. And then with good night. Good night. Good night. So you can quite clearly hear what auto-tune is doing. So let me just bring this to the next one, because here, when I sing the word night, I am actually stepping down a little bit. Good night. You can hear there that I'm saying night, da da da, la la la. I'm stepping down into it. Whereas for this next version, instead of singing the la la la, I'm glissandoing down. So I'm doing it la. Good night. Good night. As opposed to good night. Now with this one, that does work with auto-tune, as you can hear. Good night. Good night. And without. Good night. So there's still a little bit of glissando wavering, even though I am stepping down into that word night. And because there's still a little bit there, it's giving auto-tune something to do. So you still are getting some of that effect. Good night. However, with this one, good night. If I just turn auto-tune off for a second, good night. You can hear that I'm glissandoing down into it rather than stepping down. Good night. And again at the end here. Good night. Now, if I just isolate this section here. Good night. And then turn auto-tune on. Good night. Good night. Good night. You can hear that's a little bit more exaggerated than this version. Good night. So I'm just going to play this one. And this is with auto-tune off to start with. I'm going to start it about halfway through. That tonight's gonna be a good night. That tonight's gonna be a good night. And then I'm going to turn auto-tune on. That tonight's gonna be a good night. That tonight's gonna be a good night. And again, the whole thing from the beginning here. I got a feeling that tonight's gonna be a good night. that tonight's gonna be a good night, that tonight's gonna be a good night. And the next one. I got a feeling that tonight's gonna be a good night, that tonight's gonna be a good night, that tonight's gonna be a good night. So as you can hear, if you intend to use this for that T-Pain effect, put in a lot of glisses, a lot of glissandos. If you think Frank Sinatra, he used to glissando up to notes. If you think of start spreading the news, you've got that start spreading the news. Frank wouldn't hit the note bang on to start. So instead of singing start spreading, he would be start spreading. So if you put in a lot of glisses between your sung notes, then you're going to get a much more robotic effect. So there it is. That's the Antares Auto-Tune plugin. Like I said, it does a great job of pitch correction, but more people use it for this effect. Okay, so what I'd like to do in this section is just go into a bit more detail about the Arturia Keylab Mark II. The reason I want to do this is because I've never been so enthused about a piece of hardware, and more importantly, the brilliant software that comes with it as well. I've already mentioned that the build quality of this is absolutely first class. It's an all-metal construction, it's really heavy, it's got these lovely wooden side panels. All the buttons and pan pots and sliders, they've just all got a beautiful tactile feel. If you're a gigging synth player, you could put one of these in a flight case, grab your laptop and go off to a gig, and with the thousands of amazing synthesizer sounds with the software that comes with it, you're just ready to go. But in the home recording studio as a MIDI keyboard controller, it's also brilliant because you've got all the drum pads here and all the controls you need. You've got your DAW setting, your analog lab setting, your user settings, you've got everything on it. It's a very fully featured synthesizer slash MIDI keyboard controller. It's actually two things in one. Now, if you've had little or even no formal musical training whatsoever, if you've got a synth like this, it will make you a sonic wizard. I'm going to show you later how you can basically come up with a few tunes quite easily on this just by playing around with some of the amazing presets. Okay, so first what I'm going to do, I'm just going to jump onto the Arturia website because there's a few things I want to show you that are quite relevant, and then I'll come back and I'll give you a demonstration and I'll play a few things from the 80s and a few more recent things just to give you an idea of some of the brilliant sounds that this has. So, okay, first things first, let's jump onto the Arturia website and I'll just show you a couple of things. So check this out. Okay, so what I'm going to show you first, if I just click on the products tab here and then click on controllers. So these are the controllers that Arturia do. Now, don't get the Keylab Mark II mixed up with the Keylab Essential. The Keylab Essentials are Arturia's more budget range. They're still very good, but not to be confused with the more professional Keylab Mark II models, which come in 88 key, as you can see here. And if I scroll down, there's also a Keylab Mark II 61 key. And the one I have, of course, is this 49 key version. So I'm just going to click on this for a minute because there's something really cool that I want to show you here. Okay, so you can see how much the keyboard costs, this MIDI keyboard controller. But what's great is these three pieces of software that you get free with it. Now, Ableton Live Lite, I'm not going to bother going into that. To me, that's kind of irrelevant. We all know what that is. That's not a big deal. But what is a big deal is the Piano 5 software and, more importantly, the Analog Lab. This is an incredible piece of software. Now, you get all three of these free when you buy this MIDI keyboard controller. Now, Analog Lab, I'm just going to actually hop on over to here because normally you would have to buy this. So if you owned a different MIDI keyboard controller from somebody else, you can still use this, but it cost 199 euros. Now, you actually get it free when you buy this keyboard. And on top of that, you also get the Piano 5 software as well. And again, if I come over here and click on this, it will just pop up in a second. As you can see, this is 249 euros just for that. So if you add this with the Analog Lab 5, you're getting 450 euros worth of software, which means you're basically getting the keyboard free, or you're getting the software free, depending on which way you want to look at it. Now, when you buy the keyboard, you just come on over to the Arturia website You register it and then you can download a few bits and bobs. The first thing I would recommend downloading is the Arturia Software Center software. Now I'm just going to open mine up here quickly just to show you what this is. Arturia Software Center. The first time you open this, you'll just put in your username and email, and then it will automatically log you in every time. And here it will show you what products you have. And as you can see, I've got the Keylab 49 Mark II. There's also 4 synthesizer packages here that I've actually got as well. This is because I've got the full versions. I've got the Roland Jupiter 8, the Roland Juno 6, the Yamaha CS80 and the Hammond B3. If any of these ever need any updates in the future, you'll do them here. You'll just click on updates and it will show you anything that needs updating. So that is the first thing that you would download. And then of course you can download the amazing Analog Lab 5 and any instruction manuals as well. That is all on this page. Okay, so let me just quit this and open up Arturia's Analog Lab 5. Here we go. So I can just give you a quick run through of this, and I'll get onto a few demonstrations as well. So first thing I'm going to do is just change the window size. I'm just going to sort of make it a little bit bigger so it's nice and easy to see. You can change the window size, so make it as big or as small as you like. So, okay, so this is the main interface of what Analog 5 looks like. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to click Show All here, just so I can show you all the amazing vintage synthesizers and electronic keyboards from yesteryear that this software package has. So you've got here the Hammond B3, and if I click on the audio demo button here, it will give you a little brief demonstration as to the sound. We've got the famous Yamaha CS80 here. We have the Roland Jupiter 8. Let me just have a little, the Oberheim OBX. The Prophet 5. So we've got some incredible vintage synthesizers here. Now, I just want to actually point out at this stage that what Arturia did, these aren't just regular software models of vintage synthesizers and electronic pianos. What Arturia did, they actually sourced and got their hands on the actual physical versions of these, and sometimes more than one, sometimes 2 or even 3, because, you know, something like a Yamaha CS80 or a Roland Jupiter 8, they all varied. So you could actually put 3 Roland Jupiter 8s in a room, and even if they're all tuned up, and yes, the Jupiter 8 and the Yamaha CS80, many of these did need tuning on a note-by-note basis, and some of them were an absolute nightmare to keep maintained as well. The Oberheim, for example, some of the classic Oberheim models from back in the day were notoriously unreliable. The Yamaha CS80, you ask anybody that owns one of these today and they'll tell you that it is a constant maintenance job. You're constantly having to keep them maintained and tuned. So what Arturia did, they got their hands on a couple of these, each individual synthesizer, like 2 or 3 of each, and got the average sound from all of them. Now what they did, they basically took every circuit board, every diode, every chip, every processor, and it was all analyzed, stripped down, computerized, so that they could get the best model possible. So for example, if I just go here for a second and open up the Roland Jupiter 8, for example. Let me just hide this one for a second. I'm just going to come up here and change the window size, just make this nice, a little bit bigger here. Again, you've got all these incredible settings and adjustments and parameters that you can change. You've got all the stuff that the original would have had for making all kinds of changes, absolutely everything. And honestly, if somebody stuck a gun to my head, I would say I just cannot tell the difference in sound between this software version and the original. I've actually played one of these Roland Jupiter 8s back in the day, and not only can I remember exactly how it sounded, but I can also remember the smell, because, you know, when they'd been turned on for quite a long time, you get that kind of electrical circuit board smell. But the sounds of these are absolutely amazing. So let me just come back to the Analog Lab and carry on going through here for a minute. And also just to point out, things like the Yamaha CS80, Yamaha only made about 3,000 of these in the late 70s. They're very hard to get hold of, and even if you can find one, they cost anywhere between £15,000 and £20,000. Roland Jupiter 8 second-hand go for anywhere between about £12,000 and £18,000. Why anybody would want to spend sort of 15 to 20 grand on a 40-year-old analog synthesizer that needs tuning and constant maintenance is beyond me, when you've got a software version here that sounds just as good. Honestly, you've got to hear these things to believe them. I'm just going to actually click on this just to give you an example. So basically, with the Analog Lab 5 software that comes free with the Arturia Keylab Mark II keyboard, you get thousands upon thousands of presets. So if I just go to explore here, this is all the presets that sound designers have actually come up with. As you can see, there's just so many of them. There's thousands of them in here. I haven't actually been through and counted them, but there's a lot. The sound designers at Arturia, they're absolutely superb. So the chances are that if you want a really good Jupiter 8 sound or a Prophet 5 sound, if I just sort of click on the Prophet 5, for example, here, you've got all these presets already. If I just sort of play a couple. So, you know, that's just on the Prophet 5. You can see that there's just so many presets. Now, sometimes it's just good. I love presets because sometimes you don't want to actually go in and, you know, if I just sort of go back to the Yamaha, for example, up here at the top, I've actually got the full version of this software. So basically, when I open this, I can actually click open and it will actually open up the CS80 software, and I can go in here and make all kinds of changes to everything that I want. I can do pretty much anything in here. But sometimes you don't want to do that. I mean, yes, you can. If you buy the full version of this plugin, then you can go in and you can customize and come up with your own unique sounds, and then you can actually save them to your own banks and presets and stuff like that. Whereas if you don't buy the actual plugin, for example, let me just go to the Prophet 5 again because I don't actually own this one. If I try to open this one, it will just tell me that I've got to go and buy it. So, but that doesn't matter because with this Analog Lab 5 software, just look at how many presets that you've got in here. There's just so many. So again, you might be happy with just the presets. I know I am for most of the time because, to be honest, there's just so many. There's hundreds. If I go into the Hammond, the B3, if you're a Hammond organ fan, then again, just look at how many presets you've got here for this that have been put together. Here's a few notes. Now again, I actually have the full version of this software, so I can actually open it and I can go in here and I can start sort of pulling in drawbars and adjusting all sorts of things. There's a whole ton of parameters and all kinds of things that you can actually adjust and set up in here. But again, just sticking with the Analog Lab 5, I think that this has everything that most people will ever need when it comes to presets. Let me just sort of jump into another one here. Let me just come up here to, all right, Yamaha DX7. Classic synthesizer. If you're a Genesis fan, late 70s, early 80s, there's loads and loads and loads of presets in this. So again, I think most people will be happy with all these presets because there are just absolutely hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of them. Okay, so just quickly, before we start having some fun and I start playing some bits and pieces for you, I'm just going to quickly show Logic users how to basically set the Arturia keyboard up so it works seamlessly in Logic. This is really quick and easy. If you're a Logic user, you just simply go to Logic, Control Surfaces, Setup, and in here you basically click New and Install. And what you're looking for is this one here. You're looking for MKII Designs, and the model is MKII Control, and the module is Logic Control, and then you would just simply click Add. I'm not going to do that because I've already added it, and once you've done that, you just simply select it here, and the only two things you're going to change is this output port and input port. You just make sure that they are both selected to Keylab Mark II 49 DAW for both of them. Or if you've got the 88 note version, then again you just select it here. So they're the only two things you're going to change, and then you're set and ready to go. So let me just play you this a second. So if I just solo this bit, as you can see down here, I've actually got the Analog Lab 5 set as a plugin. So if I just quickly click on this and open it, it will open it up, and you can see here that I've actually got the Roland Jupiter 8 as a synth sound for this track. So that's how you use the Analog Lab as a plugin within Logic. So let me just quit this. Okay, so what I want to show you now is I'm just going to play a couple of bits and pieces just so you can hear some of the amazing sounds. I've got a few in here that I've liked, which I'll go through in a second, and I've also got a couple of saved presets that I actually made myself. So just starting with this top one, if you're a Genesis fan, I think Banks used one of these, the DX7 with Genesis back in the day. You have this lovely sound. Kind of thing. Let me just have a look at what we got here. Bass line. Again, earlier on when I said that you can use some of these amazing presets to inspire you into songwriting for coming up with ideas, this is exactly the kind of thing that I meant, because you can just go through some of these incredible arpeggiated sounds and these big fat sounds and just play around with notes. So even if you've had no musical training whatsoever, this is a great way to get inspired. Just things like that, for example. What else do we have here? Another big sound. Moving on, we've got this one, classic Roland. And then we have these incredible pianos as well on here, and again you can actually open this one up because you actually get this free with the keyboard, and then in here you can change all kinds of parameters, room reverb, microphone position, all kinds of things that you can change in here. Let me just play you something on this so you can hear how this sounds. Or something a little bit bigger and grander. that kind of thing. Okay, coming back, we have this kind of pad sound as well. Or going back to piano for a more modern kind of sound. Let me just change some. Again, if I open this piano up, you can change all kinds of things in here. So you can play more modern kind of stuff like this. Okay, what else do we have here? Okay, jazz organ. Let me just bring up the controls and keys and make a little adjustment here. Maybe bring the bass up a tad and the mid up a little bit. Bring that timing down. Okay, if you're a Deep Purple fan from the 70s, you like John Lord, you can do this kind of stuff. Sticking with Deep Purple theme for a minute, let me just sort of bring up another organ here. This is something a bit more gritty. Let me make a couple of little adjustments here. Bring up the distortion. To about there. So then you can play this kind of stuff. Let me just run through a couple of others that I've got here. On the Run, this is modelled after the famous Pink Floyd song. So if I just increase the movement, and then if I play an E flat and a B flat, we'll have the actual genuine Pink Floyd song. For example, okay, Just Beat It. If you're a Michael Jackson fan, you'll recognise this one taken off this famous keyboard here. The introduction to Beat It, really, really easy. Anybody can play this, even if you've had no musical training whatsoever. Let me just crank the master up a little bit. It goes like this. Again, really, really easy. Okay, next, Jump, because of Van Halen. Let me just adjust this a little bit. Again, that's all based on the famous Oberheim synthesizer, and that's what Van Halen used for that original track, hence the name. Okay, what else do we have here that I can show you? Obey the computer. Again, this is just another great one that will inspire you to come up with ideas for melodies and riffs. Let me see if I can come up with something here. Just that kind of thing. It's just really easy to just come up with, you know, really creative ideas with some of these incredible sounds. I've got a couple of saved presets here because I wanted to show you the split keyboard. So you can actually split the keyboard any way you want, and down at the bottom you can see here that I've got it split from C. And coming down I just have... So I'm just going to play you something, 96 Tears. It was written originally by a band called Question Mark and the Mysterians. I think the Stranglers covered it in the 80s, but it goes something like this. Okay, something a little bit more modern. The Weeknd, Blinding Lights. Again, I did a split keyboard, so from middle C up I have... And for the left I have this bass sound. You'll recognise this. And when I add the bass, okay, moving on, I've got this Duran Duran Save a Prayer. Now I'm just going to open up the Jupiter because I actually programmed quite a lot of things. I made quite a lot of alterations in here to get this sound. The delayed time, for example. Changing this from binary to dotted and adjusting the wet and dry mix. I also adjusted a few things in here with the wave. And various bits and pieces. So I did that so we can have... Anybody that's my age will remember that Duran Duran song from the 1980s, quite a famous synthesizer riff. Nick Rhodes of Duran Duran was a massive fan of the Jupiter 8. I think it was his go-to keyboard. Okay, so that's pretty much it. I hope that's given you a good idea of some of the amazing sounds that you can get out of this brilliant MIDI keyboard controller / synthesizer. I highly recommend this, and it's just so inspiring. And it really will just turn you into a sonic wizard. You can come up with all kinds of things. It will inspire you because the possibilities are absolutely endless. Okay, so during this section, I'm just going to give you a brief overview of Logic, but more importantly, the kind of thing that you can achieve. So this isn't going to be a full-on tutorial of Logic. There's no scope for that in this video, which is already long enough. I mean, for example, if I just come over here to this compressor plugin, I could probably do a 45-minute tutorial on this one plugin alone. So if I was to basically give you a full-on tutorial, it would probably take days. Besides, I've already recommended a really good book on Logic Pro, which I recommend you buy and go through. And on top of that, there's loads of YouTube videos out there already. So you can type into YouTube Logic Pro for beginners, or how to set up a project in Logic Pro, things like that. So there's loads of videos for beginners, intermediate and advanced. And there's even lots of videos on individual aspects. So for example, this Space Designer plugin, if you type into YouTube Apple Logic Pro Space Designer tutorial, there will be loads of them. So you can go into as much detail there as you like. So again, this is just to give you a brief overview of the kind of thing you can achieve. I'm just going to go through what I did, and I will also be giving you a few hints and tips along the way and showing you the best export settings for commercial release. And also, if you can't play any musical instrument, if you can't play the drums, the piano, synthesizer, bass or guitar, don't worry, because MIDI is your friend. So I'm going to be showing you how you can basically play all those in by actually painting in the notes. I'll show you how to do that briefly as well. The song I'm going to be using for this demonstration, as you can see the title along the top here, it's called Whoever's Got the Most When They Die Wins. I actually wrote this a couple of years back. I was inspired to write it after I watched the TV series Mr. Robot with Rami Malek. After I got to the end of that series, I decided to write this. I got inspired to write the lyrics, so I sat down on the couch and spent 10 minutes writing the lyrics, and over the next couple of days, I set those lyrics to music, which is here. So what I'm going to do now, I'm just going to play through a part of this song, and I'm just going to solo parts individually as I go through. And up here, I've got these three different windows. I've got this screen set 2, which is just showing the tracks. And then I've got screen set 3, which just shows the mixer. And then I've got this screen set 1, which shows the tracks and the mixer together. I've got keyboard shortcuts. I just hit 1, 2 or 3, depending where I want to go. I rarely use this one of the mixer on its own, because to be honest, if you look at the size of it, you can't make it any bigger than this. And when I have this screen set showing the tracks above, the actual mixer part is no different in size. So I always stick with this screen set 1 anyway, because I can't see the point in just having all this empty space up here when I could have a visual representation of the tracks as well. So screen set number 2 shows just the tracks. So I've got more room here, so it's easier for me to demonstrate a few things here than it is here. Okay, so let me just play through this, and I'm going to solo a few bits as I go, just to give you an idea of what the track is.
Your corporation, an evil empire, with nothing left, no nothing. Left to shine, it'll be the Scarlapini rare, while the waitress lives in sheer despair. It's all a game with needless pain, and you look at me like I'm insane, and now they all die for your sins.
Okay, so that should have given you a good idea of the kind of track this is. It's just kind of electronic punk is what a friend of mine described it as, so I'll go with that. So I'm just going to quickly walk through a few of the plugins that I've got here. So I'm just going to go back to my screen set 1 here, as you can see. So up on the vocal track here, I've already done a Melodyne job on it. So I've actually been into Melodyne and I've fixed the notes. I've put the ones that were slightly out of tune into tune, and I've adjusted all the timing on that. Again, I've done a tutorial on that already. I've done a bit of EQ by removing some of the bass, because with your voice we don't really have much bass in it, so I dropped the bass out just to give it a bit more clarity. Again, you can go onto YouTube and you can type in channel EQ in Logic to get a more in-depth tutorial on this stuff, because again, this would take 45 minutes alone to do a tutorial in here. I've added a compressor. Again, if you want to know more about that, YouTube is your friend. Type in Logic compressor tutorial and you will get this, and somebody will basically teach you what all these various settings are here and how to make the various adjustments and what it actually does. I've got a space designer, which is for the reverb. If I just solo off this vocal bit here, and let me just put a loop around a section of this so I can let you have a listen to how it sounds with and without. So if I just solo off this bit, for example.
In the bank, not a single person left to shank. You've in the bank, not a single person left to shank. You've in the bank, not a single person left to shank. You've in the bank.
So you can hear what that does. I just chose the medium space small staircase here, but as you can see, you've got larger spaces for all manner of different reverb presets, and then of course you can go in and customize things at your leisure. Again, you can YouTube Space Designer for Logic tutorial and somebody will go into every detail possible on all these settings. The final thing on the vocal track I've added, you might think this is weird, is a bass amp. Probably thinking, why put your voice through a bass amp? Well, it doesn't have to be a bass guitar. I mean, after all, Gary Newman used to put synthesizers through guitar distortion pedals and things like that. So there's no hard and fast rules. But if I just come up here, let me just hide that and zoom in a little bit here, just so I can... there we go. So if I basically just loop off this bit here, and then bring up that bass guitar amp again. Right, okay, let me just play you this with and without. So this is with the bass amp.
$1 billion in the bank, $1 billion in the bank.
And then I'm going to turn it off by clicking here.
$1 billion in the bank, 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 $1 billion in.
So you can basically hear what that's doing. Let me just bring that marker back a little bit more there. It's just adding a bit more grit, and it just makes it cut a lot more.
$1 billion in the bank.
That sounds a bit rounded and smooth, but when I turn this on,
$1 billion in the bank.
it just gives it grit, edge and distortion. So I've basically been through here and adjusted these the bass mids and trebles and various settings to get a nice sound that will help my vocals cut through the mix. Now, a tip for mixing, when you are adding various effects, don't just listen to them in isolation like I am here. I mean, yes, it's good to do that to get it into the ballpark, but you also have to listen to it with the rest of the mix as well to see what kind of effect it's having there. So let me unsolo this and then show you what I mean. So I'm going to turn it off first.
$1 billion in the bank, $1 billion in the bank.
And then on.
$1 billion in the bank, 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 $1 billion in the bank.
So you can see the effect it's having there on my vocals. It just helps it cut through the mix really nicely. Okay, I mentioned that if you can't play any musical instrument, if you can't play the drums, the bass, the guitar or anything like that, then don't worry because MIDI is your friend. So I'm now going to show you how you can basically use MIDI to program things in. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put a loop around this drum section here. Let me just bring that up to there. Now, if I double click on this drum part, it will actually bring up this MIDI region at the bottom. In fact, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to bring this loop back to about there, and then if I solo this bit here, you can see the notes that I've got here. Again, if I double click on this one, or this one, it brings up the various different drum parts. In fact, what I'm going to do is I'm going to come along to this one here because there's a little bit more going on. Again, I'm just going to zoom in on this a little bit so we can see exactly what's happening. So if I click on these notes, you can hear and you can see it says kick down here. So these are my kicks, and then I've got the hi-hat closed here. And here I've got an open hi-hat, so we have, and not forgetting this crash at the beginning. So if I wanted to actually change anything here, I can just hold down the command key and paint in extra notes like this. So again, let me just undo those. So, and again, you can change notes as well. You can just move things around or program things in and paint things in as you see fit. Okay, so basically I can even change this drum kit. So let me show you how I did that. So if I actually click on this drum track here, it shows you that I'm using the East Bay drum kit. Have a listen. And while I'm looping this, I'm just going to change some of these other kits so you can hear what they sound like. And I can even go for an electronic drum kit. Let me just sort of go in and get the Lin one here. Just for the record, if you've heard of the artist The Weeknd, he uses the Lin drum machine, which is called a LM1. They're pretty expensive. They rarely come up on eBay. They're quite old, but they sound amazing. I think Aha used the same Lin LM1 drum machine on one of their first hits, Take Me On, I believe it was. So you can actually do that as well. So let me just come back into here and go back to my East Bay kit. So that's basically how you change drum kits. So you can actually choose any drum kit you want, and then you can create a MIDI region, and then you can just go in and paint the notes. Now, once you've painted the notes in, you can actually change the volume of them as well. But I'm going to get back to that in a minute. So let me just come out of there for a sec and come back to here. I'm just going to unmute this bit. Let me loop off this bass guitar part and solo this. If I double click on it, just going to bring that loop section right back to about there. And then I'm going to zoom in here as well so you can see exactly what's going on. There we go. Let me just loop this back a little bit less to about there so I can zoom in a bit more for you. Right, there we go. Let me just put this first note in as well. So again, I can change these notes. I can just drag them around. Like that. Let me just undo these, or I can actually paint more in as well. Again, using the command key, I can actually paint notes in and I can make them shorter. I can paint in another one there, for example. So we have, and to delete notes, I can just drag over them and hit the delete key on the keyboard. Again, let me just sort of bring this up. If I click on this Stinger bass track here, we can see that I've chosen the Stinger bass. And if I just sort of play it through while clicking through a few options here. And back to Stinger bass. So again, if you can't play the bass guitar, don't worry. I actually played in this bass part using the Arturia Midi keyboard. You've got the keyboard here. So, and the corresponding lines. So you can actually play them in on the keyboard by creating a new MIDI part. And then while you have the track playing, you just basically have the metronome switched on. And as it's playing, you just play the bass part in using the MIDI keyboard. Now, again, if you can't do that, you can simply just choose what bass guitar you want, and then you just paint the notes in here. Now, once you've actually painted them in, you can actually make various adjustments to velocity, for example. So let me just solo that Stinger bass again. So if I wanted to change the velocity of these two notes, for example, I can reduce them here, bring them right down. So we have, or more, or a long way. And as you can see, when the velocity is right up, they change colour. So they're red at the moment, and then they basically change through greens and then blues and down to this kind of purple shade. So let me just put those back to where they were, which was around about 88 or so as well. So again, that's how you can program in a bass part if you can't play. Let me find something else here. Okay, so with this classic key selected, you can see there's nothing selected here on the left-hand side, and that's because I'm using the Analog Lab plugin instead. So basically, I'm going to be going into more detail on this in a different section of the video, but I'm basically using something called different ways here. So again, if I just play this, I can change it to anything else. And again, I can do a search for that and get it back here. And as we can see, this is based on a Roland Jupiter 8, and I can even edit some of the basic presets in here. Or go back, or basically choose any other instrument I want to go with that. So I can basically go through all of these here and pick any instrument that I want. And then even when I pick one, I can then choose any given preset for it. So that's how it works with the Arturia software. But with most of the other things, the Stinger bass, for example, I've chosen one there. The guitar solo, I've actually chose an electric guitar here for this one. Let me just solo that off so you can have a listen. And again, if I choose something else here, or this one, what else can we have? This. So you can actually choose any instrument you want. Okay, so that's basically the kind of thing you can achieve. Let me just sort of come back to this main window. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is just show you how to export this as a commercial release ready track. So I'm just going to put this back to the beginning. Now over here, if I just zoom in on this bit here right at the end, you will actually see that it's 178 bars long. I actually just leave a couple of bars of space at the end here, even though it does have a fade out. And the reason I leave that is just in case there's any little bits of reverberation still lingering. It's always good to leave a few bars at the end. One more thing I do want to show you just quickly. If I show you this stereo out track at the very bottom, and then I turn on this one here for showing the automations, you will see that there's a fade out at the end. So if I come over here, you'll hear it fade out. So it fades out there, but at the beginning I've also got a slight fade in. Now you might think this is strange because this hasn't got a fade in. Just have a listen. It basically starts here with these keys. So you're probably thinking, why have I got this little fade in section here at the beginning? And the reason I've got that, let me just sort of go back to the beginning and play this again. Again, it doesn't start until about bar 2 here, but the reason I've got that is because it's always a good idea just to have a slight fade in, even if it's only a fraction of a second, because if you don't, sometimes you can get a little digital click at the beginning there. So it's always a good idea, even if, again, just a fraction of a second, so you don't get any digital click at the very beginning, just by having a fade in of a fraction of a beat. So, okay, let me show you how to export for a radio broadcast commercial release ready track. On the Mac, on Logic, it's Command B to bring up the export window, which basically means bounce. You've got various export settings here for MP3, etc. But what we're going to do today is export for a commercial broadcast release ready track at maximum quality. So for that, you want to have the PCM selected, you want to make sure that it's starting at bar 1 and ending at whatever bar you want it to end at. So we're going to have it ending at the end of 179 here. I choose offline to maintain maximum quality. Normalize I have switched off because I don't want it to be reducing any loud parts or interfering with the music, so I'll have that switched off. For the format, Wave is an industry standard, so I basically go with that. Who am I to argue? And resolution 24-bit, 8-bit or 16-bit can be chosen, but I like to have the maximum quality of 24. I don't bother with 32-bit floats. Again, that's a different tutorial, but I think it's overkill, especially because we're only recording here at a sampling rate of 44.1. I always export at 44.1, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to cancel that and come over here to the project settings and quickly show you this in audio. Now, when I set up this project, I set the sample rate at 44.1. Now, a lot of people think, well, why don't you use 96 or even 48? But there's a reason for that, and I'm going to basically get onto that now. So let me just come back to here, go back to this window. So the reason I chose 44.1 is because Apple Music, Spotify, loads of these companies are still ripping CDs which are at 44.1. So you can go to 48, which would be a little bit better in quality. It's negligible. Most people won't hear it, not even on a really expensive hi-fi system or really good quality studio grade monitors. So the reason I go for 44.1 is because if I chose 48 at the beginning, and then I suddenly need to rip this onto CD for any given reason, it could be to sell or for commercial reasons, I would have to downsample from 48 to 44.1. And that's not a good thing to do, because when you change a sampling rate, it can often introduce digital artifacts and it can actually degrade the quality, whether you're upsampling or downsampling. So that's why I basically choose to work with 44.1, because like I said, Apple is still ripping CDs in that sample rate and Spotify still use it. So that is why I use it. Now, if you know you're never going to put it out on CD, then by all means set your project up in 48 and export at 48 here, but only if you're absolutely 100% that is never going to go to CD, because what you don't want to do is resample down to 44.1 for CD purposes. I have 44.1 here. I leave the file type at interleaved for best quality, and I have differing none. And this will give you the maximum quality for broadcast applications, for Spotify or any commercial release. So you then click OK and then choose your destination. I'm just going to leave it here. I'm just going to rename this. Let me just call it Whoever's Demo. And then I click bounce. And then Logic will go through and bounce that track down. It seems to be a little bit quicker than real time. So let me just speed through this section. The whole thing is only going to take about another 30 or 40 seconds, but I'll just quickly speed through it. Okay, so that's it. That whole thing took less than a minute, and we now have our track bounced down. And here it is. So this is my folder. And basically, these are some earlier ones that I exported as MP3, and this one here is one that I exported already. So this is what I'm basically going to be using to upload onto Distrokid. So that's it. That's a brief introduction into Logic, and I know it's not any great in-depth tutorial, but like I said, that would take days to cover every single aspect of this. So I just wanted to give you an overview of what it is and the kind of thing you can achieve, and the fact that if you play bass or guitar or keyboards, great, you can actually play those in live via the Antelope audio interface by plugging those instruments in. But if you can't, MIDI is your friend. You can paint the notes in and you can make the adjustments that way as well. Okay, I hope you enjoyed this session. Okay, so we've got this far and covered a lot. The equipment, setting it all up, getting the best out of it, laying down a song, mixing and mastering it, and a whole load of other stuff along the way. The final song has been bounced down and exported at a commercial release-ready quality, so now's the time to introduce it to the world via Spotify, Apple Music and iTunes, Amazon Music, Deezer, Tidal, and more. Now, you can't just upload songs to Spotify or Apple Music yourself. You have to go through a dedicated digital music distribution service or an aggregator. Choosing the right digital music distribution company can be a minefield, but don't worry, I've researched all this too, and I've looked into about 15 of the main ones and narrowed it down to just 2 for you. The 2 distribution companies I recommend are Distrokid and CD Baby. These two companies just happen to be two of the biggest and the best. CD Baby were the first digital music distribution company to arrive back in 1998, then TuneCore arrived next in 2005. But there are loads of music distribution companies around these days. Distrokid arrived in 2013, but they now distribute the most music in the world by far. Okay, so I'm not going to go into the pros and cons of all 15 companies that I researched, but I will just bullet point a few things for you. I've read some not so great things about several companies, but I won't go into all the negatives about them or start flaming them here. Some of the other companies that I looked at that seem pretty good are 1RPM, Root Note, Symphonic Distribution, Spare Music and TuneCore. But these were all runners-up to CD Baby and Distrokid for a multitude of reasons. I'll use TuneCore as one such example. They're just too expensive, way too expensive, so I dismissed TuneCore for that reason alone. Horace Music, a UK-based company that I haven't mentioned yet, well, I wanted to go with them as they're based in my country, but I dismissed them based on some of the questionable things that their ex-customers have said about them. It wasn't good reading, and it wasn't just the odd one or two negative comment, it was quite a lot. I've also heard and read negative things about Ditto too. Another company I haven't mentioned yet is AWOL, which is another British music distribution company owned by Sony Music Entertainment. But AWOL, which stands for Artists Without a Label, are geared more towards artists and bands who already have some traction and a good following. They're quite selective with their artists they take on, but if you're already established with a decent fan base and a decent bit of material, it might be worth looking them up. I've mentioned these other companies because I want you to know that I researched them all fastidiously over several days, sending emails to many of them so you don't have to. Okay, so back to my top two, CD Baby and Distrokid. Just like all the other music distribution companies out there, CD Baby and Distrokid do not have any phone support. This is normal for companies, so any technical questions or difficulties that you might encounter will have to be done via their website's ticket system. From experience, both these companies seem to take about 2 days to reply, but then you can just reply to that email. With regard to signing up and using their systems, I'd say that Distrokid is a little bit easier. You sign up with your name and email and postal address, which is straightforward enough, so is uploading a song, which I'll show you shortly. Distrokid is just a little bit more straightforward with this regard, as it's just a single page, whereas CD Baby seems to have more pages for the same thing. Distrokid is perhaps a trifle more intuitive, but you'll manage just fine with either of these two companies. The key difference between CD Baby and Distrokid is the pricing structure, and Google is full of CD Baby or Distrokid comparisons, but from all the comparisons I've read, they all seem to be missing one key vital piece of information. In a nutshell, Distrokid charges just under $20 per year subscription for a single band or artist, and for that you can upload as many singles or albums as you like, and they don't take any commission from your royalties either. They pay every cent or penny, if you're in the UK like me, directly into your bank account or into a PayPal account. This is money that would be earned via songs downloaded and paid for via Apple iTunes, for example, or from any of the streaming services that pays, such as Spotify. CD Baby, on the other hand, don't charge any annual subscription fees. Instead, they charge per song or per album upload. They charge just under $30 to upload a single song using their Pro Single option, as opposed to their standard single option, which is just under $10. But the latter, cheaper option does not include worldwide royalty collection and a few other things. Uploading an album is $29 for their standard service and $69 for their Pro service, and on top of that, CD Baby will also keep 9% of your royalties too. Now you might be thinking, this isn't so bad, at least they don't have a recurring $19.99 yearly subscription fee. But consider this, just under $20 is already cheaper than uploading just one song using CD Baby's Pro Single service. And Distrokid does not keep any of your royalties. They pay all of it to you, 100% of it. But this is where the argument comes in. People often recommend CD Baby as that one-off payment will keep your song live and online forever. You never have to pay anything to them ever again. But with Distrokid, if you cancel your $19.99 per year subscription, then all your music will come down. But Distrokid have a feature that people seem to forget about when it comes to the old CD Baby versus Distrokid debate, and that's the fact that Distrokid has what they call a Leave a Legacy option, where you can pay a one-time payment of $29 per single, and Distrokid will make sure that that single remains live and online forever, even if you cancel your $19.99 yearly subscription. And then they will continue making royalty payments into your bank account. And the good thing is about the Leave a Legacy option is that you don't have to do it at the time you upload the single. You can just log into your Distrokid account at any time in the future and click any given song and simply add it. So with this in mind, for me, Distrokid comes out on top, because even with the legacy payment, if you decide to use the option, they still come out cheaper and they don't keep a percentage of your royalties. When you start to dig deep, it's easy to understand why Distrokid distributes more music in the world than any other digital music distribution company. Okay, and for the record, I'm not getting paid a penny from any of these companies, so I won't be telling you to head on over to their site and use a special code to save 25% just so I can get a little kickback, as there are no kickbacks here, and you won't find any affiliate links to any of these companies' websites in the description below either. So both CD Baby and Distrokid are my top two choices, but for me, Distrokid wins out, but at the end of the day, you can check out both of them for yourself and then decide. One final note, pun intended, don't release albums not unless you have an amazing dark side of the moon kind of statement to make. You're way better off just getting your music out there more regularly. Like a new song every month or every 2 months, whatever fits in with your songwriting schedule. It's far better to do this than to release a new album every year, simply because these days fans are impatient and they expect more music on a regular basis than they did 30 years ago. Okay, so I'm just going to quickly show you how to upload a single using Distrokid, just so you can see how quick and easy it is. So once you've actually signed up for a Distrokid account with your email and name, the usual details, at the top here, you just click on the upload button. Now, this top bit is the services that Distrokid will upload your music to. I basically have them all selected by default. The only one I don't have is a Snapchat at the bottom because it's beta, and the YouTube Music, I don't have that checked either. Now, the reason for that is if you check that one, then Distrokid will basically claim the royalty for you off anybody that uploads your music to YouTube. But this can cause a conflict of interest with regard to copyright, because if you upload your song yourself to YouTube and you click this, then YouTube is going to send you, the owner of the music, a copyright infringement because you tick this box here. So I leave that unchecked. So this way I can upload the song to YouTube myself, and if I monetize it, then I'm just getting the money through YouTube directly rather than it coming through Distrokid. Next, we come to the number of songs. Now, if you're uploading an album with 10 songs on it, you would choose 10 songs at this point. But for me, this is just a single in this case, so I just choose one song. Next, we have the previously released. In this case, it isn't, so I leave that checked at no. And then underneath that, you just put in the band name. Here, my artist name is Digital Romance Disorder. I came up with that name because that's the name of the 6th novel that I wrote. Yes, I write fiction as well. I've written 8 novels, and this is actually the title of my 6th novel. So that's where you put the artist name or the band name. There's a few other little bits of information underneath here. Feel free to pause the video and just read these important and don't list and capitalization, etc. Next, we have artist already in Spotify. I'm not. This is the first song I've ever uploaded, so I check no there. If you were to tick the yes box, because you've already uploaded songs in the past, it will basically come up and show you your band, and then you would just basically select that. Same for the artist already in Apple Music. Again, if you've already uploaded stuff previously, you would click yes, and then it will give you options to just basically map it to match all the stuff you've already got online. If it's the first time, you click no. Underneath this, you've got the release date. You can't do anything here unless you pick the more expensive option, which is more than $29. I think it's $35 a year to have that one, so that you can pick a release date. I'm not bothered about it. I just let Distrokid upload it immediately. Same for the iTunes pre-order. I don't bother with any of that, so I haven't upgraded because that's not a feature that I'm bothered about. Next, we got the record label. Again, you've got to upgrade and pay $35.99 a year, I think it is, so you can put your own record label in there. But again, I don't mind that. And then next, we have the album artwork. Again, feel free to pause this video and just have a read at the do's and don'ts, but it's fairly self-explanatory. 3000 by 3000 pixels in JPEG is what I've uploaded here. No blurry images, not to have any prices or website URLs or anything on there, otherwise they will reject it. And then underneath this we got the language. I picked English, you pick whatever language it is in, wherever you're based. And then you've got a primary genre and a secondary genre. So you put the primary genre obviously in the primary one, and then you can choose a secondary genre as well. Again, all self-explanatory and pretty straightforward. And then underneath, we've got the track and the song title. Here, my track's called Whoever's Got the Most When They Die Wins. Again, feel free to pause the video and just have a read at the little bits of information under there, but it's fairly self-explanatory. And then we've basically got this section for radio edit bonus track under the show version in the track title. I just have that clicked no because it's just a normal version. And then underneath this, you have the choose file, which is where you're going to click to choose the WAV file that was exported from Logic Pro. In this case, you just choose that off your hard drive and click there. And then underneath, we've got the songwriter details. Now, I'm responsible for the lyrics and the music, so I basically picked music and lyrics. But if one person wrote the music and somebody else did the lyrics, like Elton John and Bernie Taupin, for example, you would put the name of the lyricist in one section, and then you would click on the Add Another Songwriter and put them for the music. Underneath that, we have a explicit lyric section. If it's normal, then you've got this radio edit bit underneath. In my case, I do have one expletive. I got an F word in there, so I've clicked yes. Under this, we have instrumental. My song contains lyrics, so I have that one checked because it's not an instrumental. And then underneath this, we have the preview clip start time. If you got quite a long intro or you just want to jump to where the beginning of the first verse starts, then you can choose in seconds. I've chose 12 seconds here, which basically just loses the first 12 seconds of the song. So if somebody previews it, it's going to start at 12 seconds in. Again, fairly self-explanatory. The iTunes price, if you're on the $29 subscription package that I'm on, is 99 cents, and you can't change that unless you're on the upgraded version, in which case you would be able to. But again, I don't mind that, so I just stick with the 99 cents. Then underneath this, we've got extras and optional but awesome section. The only one I pick in here is the Shazam and iPhone Siri option. That means people can Shazam it if they're out and about, they hear it in a pub somewhere, and if they do, lucky you, more power to your elbow. Or you can just say, hey Siri, play Digital Romance Disorder, and if you've got this section ticked, then it will play that, or whatever the name of your band is. Underneath, you've got these 3 checkboxes that you have to tick. They're mandatory, so just have a quick read through those to make sure you're happy with that, and then you click done. Once you click done, then in my case, this song's about 5.5 minutes long. It took 45 seconds exactly to upload. So I'm just going to fast forward through this 45 seconds here. There we go. And then it just says finishing. And once it's finished, that's it. You get this little green check at the top and it's done. Now, when I uploaded this song, it was 4 hours later before it appeared on Apple iTunes for sale, where people could buy it and download it. That's how quick Distrokid managed to get this onto Apple iTunes. I'm in the UK, and I remember doing this at about 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and by about 8 in the evening, it was on iTunes. The next morning when I woke up, it was on Spotify, and it could be streamed. So that's how quick it was. The other platforms, including Deezer, took anything up to 4 weeks to appear, so all pretty quick, and as you can see, uploading the song to Distrokid is a quick and simple process. If you want to have a listen to the song that I just uploaded to check out the final production quality, just hop on over to Spotify or Apple Music and do a search for Digital Romance Disorder and the single Whoever's Got the Most When They Die Wins. Now, you may not have thought of this, or you might have just overlooked it, but once your music is up on Spotify and Apple Music for the whole world to get their ears around, I'd also strongly recommend giving your audience something to get their eyes around too. I'm talking about the power of video, which is a very persuasive medium. Just think back to all those Adam and the Ants videos during the early 80s. Who, you might be asking? Okay, I'm giving my age away now, but you get my point. MTV was massive, and for good reason. These days, people will be more willing to watch your video than to listen to your song. So go and grab that friend, you know the one, who's just spent £3,000 on a spiffy new mirrorless camera that shoots awesome 4K video. And you know it shoots awesome 4K video because he showed you some footage that he shot of his dog in the back garden. Well, give him the opportunity to shoot something professional for a change, and then get him to phone his friend who owns a few video lights. And then grab your girlfriend or boyfriend or grab your singer and rope them into directing it. Then grab up a few more friends and sit down and come up with some creative ideas for a cool music video. Equipment shouldn't be a problem these days. A modern iPhone shoots better quality video than a £30,000 broadcast camera did 25 years ago, and by a long way too. The only thing you have to worry about is your creativity, coming up with something cool and original to get everybody talking. Everybody has a computer these days, and I bet you already know somebody who has either Final Cut Pro or DaVinci Resolve installed, who's probably edited a load of videos already. The more friends that you can rope into helping you shoot a music video, the more input and the more creativity and the more ideas will be thrown into the pot, and the better it will be. Just make sure somebody brings a nice loud ghetto blaster or boombox along so that you've got your song on set to mime along to. Okay, just before I wrap up this video, I just want to give you a few mixing tips relating to your studio monitors. It's absolutely vital to get used to your monitors and how they sound in your studio. To do this, put a kind of mixtape of songs together and play them through your monitors regularly so you can get used to their sound. But not just any old songs. The production quality of any songs on your mixtape should be top-notch, of at least CD quality, and not just a bunch of compressed MP3 files that you grabbed off your iPod, as these won't be accurate due to the compression algorithms of MP3 and how this compression discards certain frequencies from the music. MP3 files just don't have the fullness, clarity or dynamic range of, say, a CD, which is 16-bit 44.1 kHz. Also, pick reference tracks that are in the style that you intend writing. If you write R&B music, the album After Hours by The Weeknd, for example, is an excellent quality production for mixed comparison purposes. But research high quality productions by top producers. Some quality production examples from yesteryear are Phil Collins' album Hello I Must Be Going, Simply Red's Picture Book, or pretty much anything by Steely Dan. Admittedly, these are all 1980s albums, but they're top-notch productions. Some examples of good albums ruined by poor quality productions are the first two Oasis albums, which just sound like a woolly, confusing mess, especially in the mids, or The House That Dirt Built by The Heavy. I'm not quite sure what's going on in the mix with that one. So do some research for quality productions in the style you intend to write, and use your ears too. If they don't sound like great quality productions, then they probably aren't. By using a quality selection of tracks for reference purposes, you'll know exactly how a professionally produced song should sound on your system compared to your own mix. Set your computer up so that you can A/B switch between your own mix and any given reference track. Even top producers use this mix referencing technique to check certain aspects of any given mix, such as the airiness in the vocals, or to check if a snare drum is too far back in the mix, for example. Also, reference material is important for getting familiar with your room ambience and acoustics, because getting room acoustics right is one of the trickiest parts of setting up a home recording studio. And if it isn't quite perfect, at least you'll know how a commercial track should sound in that environment, and by using a reference track for comparison purposes, all should be good. It's also worth noting that although professional engineers will always tell you never to master your own tracks, these days most budget engineers do master their own tracks, and this is another reason for using reference tracks at various points during your mixing process, which includes compression and loudness processing. This mix referencing technique is by far the best way of closing the gap between amateur and professional productions, and it costs no money to do it. Mike Sr. goes into this in more detail in his book Mixing Secrets for the Small Studio on page 64. Also, only ever mix at a volume where you can still have a conversation without shouting with the person sitting next to you. Just occasionally turning the volume up a little more to make sure that the vocals don't pop out too much and to assess the bottom end. And only ever do this for about 30 seconds or so at a time. Protecting your hearing is vital, and frankly, there's just no need to mix at high volume levels. It's also important to switch over to headphones when you're nearing the end of your mix to make sure everything sits well in the mix and sounds good there too. Remember, majority of the younger generation listen to most of their music via headphones or earbuds these days, so your stereo imaging might need to be adjusted somewhat to make sure it sounds good via regular hi-fi speakers, a cheap Bluetooth speaker, terrible shopping mall systems, and yes, headphones. And finally, step out of the room and listen to your mix while standing out in the corridor to listen to how things sound when the music has to come through an open studio door and around a corner. If anything is sticking out in the high frequencies, it will jump out even more using this technique as higher frequencies travel further, while bass tends to stick around in the room. It's also very important to take lots of short breaks, and when I say breaks, I mean leave the room and go to another room that is not acoustically treated and that has different sound characteristics, the kitchen or your living room, anywhere, just so that your ears can refresh for 5 minutes or so. It's not uncommon to hear stories of people that spend hours upon hours mixing, only to come back to it the next morning to discover that their mix was absolutely crap. Mixing for long periods will give you ear fatigue, and you won't be able to see the forest for the trees, so take lots of short, frequent breaks. Okay, so that brings me to the end of the video. If you managed to get this far in just one sitting, congratulations. Now, obviously, I couldn't go into every bit of detail on every plugin and setting because that would have made this video about 2 days long. But there are plenty of tutorials on YouTube. So if you want to know about using the compressor in Logic, just type into YouTube, using the compressor in Logic, and you can look into any given plugin via the numerous tutorials on YouTube at your leisure. So I hope you could take something from this, many things in fact. I just wanted to give you a good overview of what's involved in setting up a home recording studio, getting the track laid down and getting it out there. Now all that remains is for me to wish you luck, well, with a little bit of talent and creativity of course, in your musical endeavours. I'm Nigel Cooper, thanks for watching, bye for now.
Nothing to desire. $1 billion in the bank, not a single person left to shine. Your bill has gone appealing rare, while the waitress lives in sheer despair. It's all a game with needless pain, and you look at me like I'm insane. And now they all die for your sins. Whoever's got the most when they die wins. Ferrari for the weekend. A trophy wife, she smiles, she tries so hard to pretend. No need to catch no flies with honey. Not while you got your health, the blind